This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened to us on that desert highway 11 years ago. I was just 8 years old at the time, but some memories stick with you no matter how young you are. This is one of those memories that never fades. It just sits there in my mind, refusing to go away. My family and I were making our usual trip across the border to visit my grandparents and cousins. We'd done this journey dozens of times before, always leaving around 6 in the evening so we could drive through the night while us kids slept in the back of our old Chevrolet. My dad, Rogerio, always said it was better this way, less traffic, cooler temperatures, and we'd arrive fresh in the morning. That particular trip started like any other. Mom packed sandwiches and thermoses of coffee for my parents and juice boxes for me and my 2 younger sisters. Dad loaded our suitcases into the trunk, Tetris style, until everything fit perfectly with just enough space for us to see out the back window. I remember bringing my Game Boy and a flashlight so I could play when everyone else fell asleep. I never could sleep well in cars. The movement and the strange sounds always kept me awake. We set off as the sun was setting, and for the first few hours, everything was normal. My sisters fell asleep almost immediately, slumped against each other in their car seats. Mom and Dad chatted quietly in the front while I played Pokemon with the volume turned all the way down. The border crossing was uneventful, just the usual questions and a quick glance at our papers before we were waved through. It must have been around 2 in the morning when things started to feel off. We were on this long, empty stretch of highway with nothing around but desert. No street lights, no gas stations, no houses, just cacti and rocks, their strange shapes barely visible in the starlight. The moon was just a sliver that night, which made everything seem darker than usual. I was half dozing, not quite asleep, but not fully awake either, when I heard my mom's voice cut through the quiet of the car. "Rogerio, that car has been behind us since we left." Her voice had this edge to it that made me sit up straight. I turned around, trying to see past the pile of luggage to the rear window. There was a car behind us, its headlights bright in the darkness. It was keeping a steady distance, not too close, but definitely there. Dad just shrugged it off. "Many people use this road, Sylvia. They must be heading to a nearby town like us." But Mom wasn't convinced. I could see her shifting in her seat, constantly checking the rearview mirror. Her worry was making me nervous, and I started watching the car too. It stayed behind us for miles and miles. No matter how the road curved or how Dad varied our speed, those headlights remained fixed behind us. "He's getting closer, Rogerio," Mom suddenly said, her voice tighter than before. "He's too close." She was right. The car had closed the gap between us and was now practically touching our bumper. I remember feeling my heart pounding as I watched those headlights fill our rear window. They were so bright they illuminated the inside of our car. Dad accelerated, pushing our old Chevy faster than I'd ever felt it go before. The engine made this strained whining noise, but the car behind us kept pace easily. Then it backed off a little, only to surge forward again moments later, like it was playing with us. For what felt like forever, but was probably about 30 minutes, this cat-and-mouse game continued. The car would back off until we could barely see its headlights, giving us hope that maybe they'd turned off or found their destination. Then suddenly, it would be right behind us again, so close I was sure it would hit us. Sometimes it would pull into the left lane like it was going to pass, only to match our speed exactly, staying right beside us for agonizing minutes before falling back again. My sisters had woken up by this point. Anna, who was 6, kept asking what was happening, while 3-year-old Luisa had started crying. Mom tried to calm them, saying it was nothing, but her voice shook too much to be convincing. I remember looking at the speedometer and seeing the needle pushed further to the right than I'd ever seen it. Dad's knuckles were white on the steering wheel and he kept muttering under his breath, prayers or curses, I couldn't tell. During one moment when the car had backed off a bit, Mum suddenly straightened in her seat. "Rogerio, there's a police car up ahead. Pull over." Sure enough, there was a patrol car parked on the shoulder of the road, its colored lights off but clearly visible in our headlights. Without hesitation, Dad swerved over and screeched to a halt just in front of the police car. I turned around just in time to see the vehicle that had been following us speed past without slowing down. The officer approached our car with his hand on his holster, looking confused. Dad rolled down his window and I could feel the cool night air rush in. "Is everything okay?" the officer asked, leaning down to look at all of us. Mum started talking rapidly, explaining how a car had been following us for miles, playing this terrifying game of getting close and backing off. The officer's face grew serious as she spoke. He told us that this stretch of highway was notorious for robberies and assaults. Criminals would follow travelers for hours, waiting for them to get tired or pull over at a rest stop before attacking. "I'll escort you for a while," he offered. "Follow me for the next 20 miles or so until we reach a more populated area." The relief that washed over us was incredible. I remember feeling like I could breathe again as we pulled in behind the police cruiser with its lights now flashing. My sisters stopped crying, and Mom kept thanking God over and over. For about 10 minutes, we drove behind the police car, feeling safe for the first time in hours. But then Mom gasped, and I felt that cold fear return instantly. "Rogerio, look, it's them!" There, parked on the shoulder ahead, was the same car. I recognized its distinctive headlights and the shape of its hood. As we passed by, escorted by the police, I caught a glimpse of the driver, just a dark silhouette behind the wheel, perfectly still, watching us go by. I couldn't see a face, just the outline of a head against the faint glow of the dashboard. The police officer must have noticed it too, because he slowed down slightly as we passed, perhaps making note of the vehicle. But he didn't stop, and neither did we. We just kept driving, now even more terrified than before. "He knows this road," Dad said quietly. "He knew we'd come this way." The officer escorted us for another 15 minutes before turning off at a junction, giving us directions to stay on the main highway, where there would be more traffic even at this hour. He assured us we'd be fine from here on out, but none of us felt fine. Every set of headlights in the rearview mirror made Mom tense up. Dad didn't stop for anything. Not for gas, not for bathroom breaks, nothing. We drove straight through until morning, arriving at my grandparents' house as the sun was coming up. For the rest of that vacation, nobody mentioned what had happened. It was like we all silently agreed to pretend it never occurred. But when it came time to drive back home, Dad insisted we leave in the morning and only drive during daylight hours. We never did another night journey across the border again. Over the years, I've tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was just a drunk driver. Maybe it was someone who got annoyed that we were driving too slowly. Maybe it was all a coincidence. But deep down, I know it wasn't. The way that car followed us, the way the driver seemed to enjoy scaring us, the fact that they were waiting for us even after we'd gotten police assistance, it was deliberate. Someone had targeted us specifically and was patient enough to wait for the police escort to end. I'm 19 now, and I've started driving long distances on my own. But I never drive at night on empty roads. I always make sure my gas tank is full, my phone is charged, and someone knows my route and expected arrival time. And I constantly check my rearview mirror, because the thing that scares me most isn't just what happened that night, it's that we never found out why. We never learned who was in that car or what they wanted from us. We never got any closure. Sometimes when I'm driving alone and see headlights behind me that stay there for too long, I feel that same panic rising in my chest that I felt as an 8-year-old boy. And I wonder if somewhere out there, that driver is still patrolling those desert highways at night, looking for families like mine, playing their terrifying game of cat and mouse. And I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't seen that police car that night. Story 2. I've been carrying this burden for 29 years now. I've never told the complete story to anyone outside the department, but I think people deserve to know what really happened that night. I was the first responding officer to the scene after Mark and David disappeared. It was September 18th, 1994. I was working the night shift as a state trooper with the Oregon State Police patrolling the Southern District near Klamath Falls. The weather was unusually cold for September, I remember, because I'd forgotten my thermal undershirt and was feeling the chill through my uniform. Around 11:40 p.m., I heard Mark Hansen's voice come through the radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 14. We're stopping to check out a black sedan parked on the shoulder of Highway 97, mile marker 278. No plates visible from our approach angle. Requesting registration check on a black sedan in this area." Nothing unusual about the call. Highway 97 gets all kinds of traffic and vehicles. Pulled over on the shoulder aren't uncommon. Dispatch responded they had no registration data for any black sedan reported in the area. A few minutes later, Mark radioed again. "Unit 17 is also on scene now." That was David Wheeler's unit. They must have been patrolling nearby sectors and converged on the same vehicle. What happened next still gives me nightmares. Mark's voice came through again, but different. Tense. Professional, but clearly concerned. "Dispatch, we've got a code 30. Code 30 meant officer needs assistance. Not an emergency code, but a request for backup. Something's not right here." Then I heard it. This high-pitched sound that started low and quickly escalated until I had to rip my radio receiver away from my ear. It was like metal being twisted, but with an electrical quality to it. Then nothing but static. Dispatch tried to raise both units several times with no response. I was only about 15 minutes out, so I hit the lights and sirens and floored it. Dispatch had already alerted other units, but I was going to be first on scene. When I arrived at mile marker 278, my headlights illuminated both patrol cars parked at angles on the shoulder. The light bars on both vehicles were still flashing, casting red and blue across the asphalt and the scrubby desert vegetation. But there was no black sedan, no officers. I called it in immediately and approached with my weapon drawn. The driver's side doors on both patrol vehicles were open. The engines were still running. Mark's car had the radio mic dangling from its cord, swinging slightly in the breeze. His clipboard was on the seat with a half-filled citation form. David's car had his flashlight on the ground beside it, still switched on. What struck me immediately was how everything felt wrong. The air had this weird electricity to it, making the hair on my arms stand up. There was a smell like after a lightning strike, that ozone scent, and it was completely silent. No insects, no distant traffic, noise, nothing. I started calling out for Mark and David. No response. I followed protocol and didn't approach any further until backup arrived, which took another 7 agonizing minutes. By then, I'd circled both vehicles at a distance and spotted their footprints in the soft shoulder dirt. This is where it gets truly bizarre. Both sets of boot prints, standard issue department boots. I recognized the tread pattern immediately. Led from their vehicles toward a spot about 20 feet away, and then they just stopped. Not like they'd turned around or jumped. They simply ended, as if Mark and David had been lifted straight up or had ceased to exist at that exact point. When Sergeant Reeves arrived with 2 other troopers, we established a perimeter and began a proper search. The black sedan was nowhere to be found. No tire tracks indicating a vehicle had been there recently, except for the patrol cars. We found both officers' portable radios on the ground at the spot where their footprints ended. When I picked up Mark's radio, I nearly dropped it. The plastic casing had partially melted, not like from fire, but as if it had been subjected to intense radiation or something. The metal components were warped too. As the night went on, more officers arrived, including the department's forensic team. They discovered something none of us had noticed at first. Around the area where the footprints ended was a perfect circle about 15 feet in diameter where all the vegetation was dead. Not burned, just dead. Brown and desiccated like it had aged years in an instant. The forensics guys took readings and found elevated radiation levels in that circle. Not dangerously high, but definitely abnormal. They couldn't identify the type of radiation. It didn't match the standard profiles. The strangest discovery came when the sun rose. About 30 yards from the scene, embedded in the trunk of a juniper tree, was Mark's service weapon, his Glock 22, not lying against the tree or At the base of it, but literally embedded within the living wood, like the tree had grown around it. The forensics team had to cut the section out to recover the weapon. Later examination showed the molecular structure of the gun had been altered. Parts of the metal had become porous, other sections had crystallized. The lab guys said it was as if the atoms themselves had been rearranged. They'd never seen anything like it. We found Mark's watch about 10 yards from the circle. The glass was shattered and the hands were frozen at 11:52 p.m. David's watch was never recovered. The investigation that followed was massive. Every available trooper was assigned to search the area. K9 units were brought in, but the dogs acted strangely, whining and refusing to go near the circle. Helicopters with thermal imaging searched for days. 3 days after the disappearance, the traffic camera footage from a gas station 2 miles north was finally processed. It had captured a black sedan passing by at 11:37 p.m., right before the incident. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to see there was no driver in the vehicle. The forensic video analyst confirmed it wasn't a camera malfunction or trick of the light. The driver's seat was empty. I was assigned to the investigation task force. We interviewed everyone who lived within 10 miles of the scene. Nobody reported seeing or hearing anything unusual that night, except for one elderly man who claimed the power in his house had surged around midnight, frying his television. 6 months after Mark and David vanished, a package arrived at OSP headquarters. No return address, postmarked from Seattle. Inside was David Wheeler's badge and a cassette tape. The badge looked normal, except for microscopic patterns etched into the metal that weren't part of the original design. The tape was analyzed first for fingerprints, none found, then played. The first 2 minutes were nothing but static with occasional pulses of that same high-pitched sound from the radio that night. Then voices, distorted, slowed down, but recognizable as Mark and David. Mark's voice, "Can't determine our location. Light is different." David's voice, "They're watching, not human. Time is wrong." Mark again, "Tell my family, still trying to get back." The rest was unintelligible. The tape was sent to an audio forensics lab at the FBI. They determined it contained traces of radiation consistent with cosmic rays, the kind of radiation found in deep space, not on Earth. They also found the magnetic patterns on the tape were impossible to create with known recording technology. The case went cold after that. Mark and David were officially listed as missing, presumed dead. Their families held memorial services. The department created a scholarship fund in their names. I kept investigating on my own time. In 1997, I learned that 3 other vehicles had disappeared on that same stretch of Highway 97 since 1952, all during September. In each case, the vehicles were later found elsewhere with no explanation, but the drivers were never located. In 2003, I got a call from a friend still on the force. Construction crews widening Highway 97 near the disappearance site had uncovered something buried about 4 feet down. It was a small metal box like a homemade time capsule. Inside was a single newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. The paper was dated September 18, 2044, exactly 50 years after Mark and David disappeared. The headline read, "Mystery Solved, Missing Officers Return." The article stated that Mark Hansen and David Wheeler had reappeared at the exact spot they'd vanished, not having aged a day, but both died within hours from what doctors termed temporal displacement syndrome. The paper looked authentic in every way, but it was impossible. A newspaper from the future. The department hushed it up, calling it a sick prank. The box and paper disappeared into evidence, and I was officially warned to stop my unauthorized investigation. I retired in 2010, but I still drive out to mile marker 278 every September 18th. In 2019, on the 25th anniversary, I brought a police scanner with me. At exactly 11:52 p.m., through the static, I heard Mark's voice as clear as the night he disappeared. "Still on patrol, awaiting backup. Time is not what you think." Since then, there have been reports of a black sedan with no driver seen on Highway 97. Motorists report their electronics malfunctioning as they pass mile marker 278. Some claim to have seen two state troopers standing on the roadside, only to disappear when approached. I don't know what happened to Mark and David that night. Whether it was aliens, a government experiment gone wrong, or something to do with dimensions or time, I just don't know. But I believe they're still out there somewhere, trying to find their way back. Next month is the 29th anniversary. I'll be at mile marker 278 again, waiting, because whatever took my friends is still out there. And if that newspaper is right, in 15 more years, they'll be coming back. Story 3. I never told anyone what I found in Emily Goodwin's recordings. Not the whole truth anyway. I'm still a respected academic, and I'd like to keep it that way, but I can't sleep anymore without medication. I've turned down 3 research opportunities on the Olympic Peninsula, and sometimes I wake up in cold sweats, convinced I can hear voices coming from my bathroom drain. It's been 8 years since I found her equipment case, and I think I need to finally tell someone. I'm a geology professor specializing in seismic activity. In January 2014, I was conducting standard surveys at Fort Worden State Park. Those old military bunkers are perfect for our equipment since they're stable and isolated from surface noise. I'd been in those tunnels maybe 20 times before, nothing unusual about them. That January was unusually cold for the Olympic Peninsula. We'd had freezing rain the night before, and most of my grad students bailed on me, so I was working alone, which I actually preferred. I was in one of the deeper artillery bunkers, the ones tourists don't visit because they're too dark and damp. I needed to check a seismometer we'd left there the previous month. The bunker was about what you'd expect. Concrete walls discolored with age, that distinctive musty smell of old military installations, and absolutely silent except for water dripping somewhere. My footsteps echoed as I walked deeper in. I'd brought a good LED headlamp, but even with that, the darkness seemed to swallow the light a few feet ahead of me. I noticed right away that our equipment had been moved. Not dramatically, just shifted about 3 feet from where we'd secured it. I figured maybe park rangers had been through, though they usually notify us. But when I got closer, I saw something wedged behind a crumbling section of concrete, something that definitely wasn't there before. It was a hard plastic case, the expensive kind photographers use, black, waterproof, with those heavy-duty latches. It was partially buried under what looked like loose gravel that had fallen from the wall. At first, I thought someone had left expensive equipment behind, which would have been a lucky find. When I pulled it out, I noticed 2 things immediately. 1, it was heavier than it looked, and 2, it had EG scratched into the side. I remember thinking someone was probably looking for this, and I should turn it into the park office. I opened it right there in the bunker. Inside was a Sony digital voice recorder, an older model from the early 2000s, a few memory cards in plastic cases, a small notebook with a water-resistant cover, and some other things. A small flashlight, extra batteries, a folding knife. Everything was neatly organized, clearly belonging to someone who knew what they were doing. I picked up the notebook first. On the first page was written, Emily Goodwin, Port Townsend Herald, with a phone number. That name sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. The notebook contained interview notes, coordinates, tide tables, and references to local disappearances dating back to the 80s. There were sketches of what looked like petroglyphs or symbols I didn't recognize, and repeated references to something called the 7-year cycle. I'm embarrassed to admit I didn't connect it to the missing journalist right away. I'd only moved to Washington State in 2008, so the story wasn't fresh in my mind. But I knew I'd found something important. I put everything back in the case and took it with me. I finished my work quickly. I was suddenly uneasy being alone in that bunker and drove back to my office at the university. That afternoon, I searched Emily Goodwin's name online and felt my stomach drop when I saw the headlines from 2003. I should have taken everything straight to the police. That would have been the responsible thing to do, but I didn't. I wanted to understand what I'd found first, so I charged the voice recorder, which miraculously still had some battery life, and started listening. There were dozens of recordings. Emily had a pleasant voice, professional but warm. The earlier files were mostly interviews with locals about strange lights over the water, electronic devices malfunctioning, and unusual marine debris. Nothing that seemed immediately connected to her disappearance. Then I found the interview with Thomas Mercer, a retired Coast Guard officer. His voice was gravelly and he spoke quietly, like someone who didn't want to be overheard. He talked about a classified operation in 1987 after 2 lighthouse maintenance workers disappeared. He described how they had sealed a sea cave near Point Wilson. "Some things should stay buried," he said. "Some things aren't meant for us to understand." Emily pressed him for details, but he wouldn't elaborate. He just kept repeating that it happened every 7 years. "Mark my words," he said. "January 2003 will bring it back. Already seeing the signs. Dead things washing up that don't look right. Lights where no boats should be." The last recording was dated January 17th, 2003. It began with Emily narrating as she hiked somewhere, breathing heavily. She described an exceptionally low tide that had exposed parts of the coastline rarely accessible. She mentioned following Mercer's directions to find the sealed cave. "I'm at the coordinates now," she said. "The concrete seal they poured in '87 has been damaged. Not sure if it's erosion or something else. There's a gap big enough to squeeze through. I'm going to take a look inside." What followed was about 20 minutes of Emily describing her descent. The cave started as a natural formation but quickly became something else. She described walls that appeared partly constructed, with unusual symbols or patterns embedded in them. Her voice grew increasingly tense as she went deeper, occasionally stopping to note compass readings or take photos. Then the recorder captured her gasp. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I've entered some kind of chamber. It's massive. I can't even see the ceiling with my light. There's something in the center. It looks like a cube made of black glass, but it's not reflecting light properly. And there are people here." Her voice dropped even lower. "They look like, I think some of them might be the missing hikers from the park, but they're different now. Their skin is wrong, and they're building something around the cube. It looks like a doorway or a frame. They haven't noticed me yet." Then came sounds of movement, Emily's quickened breathing. "They've seen me. I'm getting out of here. They're blocking the tunnel back up." There were sounds of struggle, Emily's panicked breathing, rocks scraping against something. Then her voice suddenly changed completely. It became flat, emotionless. "The door is opening now. It will be complete when the tide returns." The recording continued for another 3 minutes with nothing but strange ambient sounds. Something like water flowing, but with an odd rhythmic quality to it, and occasionally what sounded like distant voices speaking in unison, though I couldn't make out any words. I sat in my office until well after midnight, listening to those recordings over and over. I read through her entire notebook. Emily had documented a pattern going back decades. Every 7 years, strange phenomena would occur around Port Townsend. Unusual marine debris washing ashore, electronic equipment malfunctions, people going missing near the shoreline. The next morning, I contacted the Port Townsend Police Department. I told them I'd found Emily Goodwin's equipment while doing research. They sent someone to collect it immediately. I handed everything over except for copies I'd made of her recordings and notes. I know that was wrong, but I needed to understand what happened. The detective who came was surprised but not shocked. He told me they still considered Emily's case open but had no leads. When I mentioned the cave and Thomas Mercer, he just nodded tiredly. "Mercer passed away in 2009, he said. "We interviewed him extensively back then. Seems he had early onset dementia and a lot of strange ideas." The police report said they investigated the shoreline based on Emily's last known locations, but found no cave matching her description. Coastal erosion and several small landslides had significantly altered the area since 2003. They concluded she might have fallen or become trapped by the rising tide. I wanted to believe that explanation, but Emily's recordings haunted me. I became obsessed with her research. I traced the 7-year pattern she had identified: 1987, 1994, 2001, 2008, and 2015, which was just a year away when I found her case. In January 2015, I took a research sabbatical and rented a cottage in Port Townsend. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but I had to see for myself. For 3 weeks, nothing unusual happened. Then the local paper reported strange marine debris washing up near Point Wilson Lighthouse. I went to see it, gelatinous masses that didn't look like any sea life I recognized. The official explanation was unusual algae bloom. 2 days later, my laptop and phone both stopped working simultaneously. When I took them to be repaired, the technician said it looked like they'd been exposed to a strong electromagnetic pulse. That same night, people reported seeing lights over the water near Fort Worden. I was terrified, but couldn't stay away. I went to the shoreline during the lowest tide of January, following Emily's coordinates as best I could. The coastline had indeed changed dramatically. Where her notes indicated the cave should be, there was nothing but a jumble of fallen rocks and debris. As I stood there, I heard something coming from between the rocks, a sound like voices speaking in unison, too faint to make out the words. I put my ear closer to a gap in the rocks, and the voices became marginally clearer. They were saying the same phrase over and over: "The door remains open." I ran back to my rental car and left Port Townsend that night. I've never returned. I requested a transfer to our university's inland campus and was granted it. I told my colleagues I developed an aversion to the coastal humidity. I still have the copies of Emily's recordings. Sometimes, late at night, I listen to that final one, trying to convince myself there's a rational explanation for everything. But I know what I heard at those rocks. The 7-year cycle continues. January 2022 just passed, and I watched the Port Townsend news from a safe distance. 3 hikers went missing near Fort Worden. Unusual marine debris washed ashore. Locals reported electronic malfunctions throughout town, and somewhere beneath Point Wilson, I believe. Something is still building, still waiting, still coming through a door that Emily Goodwin witnessed opening. Whatever changed her voice in those final moments, I think it's patient. I think it has all the time in the world. Story 4. I've been sitting on this experience for almost 6 months now, trying to make sense of what happened that night at Westlake Memorial. I still can't. Maybe writing it down will help, or maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I don't know. What I do know is that I haven't slept properly since December 12th. I worked night security at Westlake Memorial Hospital for just over 3 years. It's this old building about 30 minutes outside the city, isolated, surrounded by woods, the kind of place that looks creepy even in broad daylight. Most of it was renovated in the 90s, but the East Wing is original, built in the 30s. I never liked that section, especially at night. My shift was 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and I usually did 4 rounds throughout the night. The midnight round was always the worst. Something about that time of night just feels wrong, you know? Like the world is holding its breath. That night started normal enough. I clocked in at 10, chatted with the day guy, Mike, grabbed my flashlight and radio, and started my first round. Everything was quiet, just the usual hospital sounds. Beeping machines, the occasional cough, squeaky wheels on medicine carts. When midnight rolled around, I started my second round in the West Wing. Nothing unusual there. Then I headed toward the East Wing, where the long-term care unit was on the 4th floor. The elevator ride up was the same as always, that flickering light in the corner that maintenance kept promising to fix but never did. The doors opened with that tired ding, and I stepped out. I knew something was wrong immediately. Hospitals are never completely quiet, even at night. There's always someone moving around, machines humming, phones ringing at the nurses' station. But that night, the 4th floor was silent, like completely silent. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I called out, "Hello, Carolyn?" Nurse Carolyn was always on duty for the night shift in this wing. No answer. I walked to the nurses' station, empty. Carolyn's coffee mug was there, still warm, lipstick on the rim. Her clipboard with patient notes was open. pen resting on top mid-sentence. I tried my radio. "Base, this is Reynolds. Anyone seen Carolyn from 4th East?" Just static. I tried again. Nothing. Great, I thought. Another night with crappy radio coverage in this ancient building. The floor had 16 rooms, 8 on each side of the hallway. I decided to check each one, make sure the patients were okay. Most were sleeping, some with TVs playing quietly. Nothing seemed out of place until I got to room 412. Mrs. Abernathy was awake, sitting up in bed, staring at the door like she'd been waiting for me. "Everything okay, Mrs. Abernathy?" I asked. "He's making his rounds," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who is?" "Dr. Blackwood. He comes at night. Always has." She looked at me with these cloudy eyes that somehow seemed to see right through me. "They all go with him eventually." I figured she was confused. Most of the patients on this floor were elderly, many with dementia. "I'm sure Dr. Harrison will be by in the morning," I said, referring to the actual doctor assigned to this floor. She shook her head slowly. "Not Harrison. Blackwood. Been here since the beginning. I remember him from when I was a girl. My mother worked here." Something about the way she said it made my skin crawl, but I smiled and told her to try to get some sleep. As I was leaving, she grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Michael went with him," she said, "about 20 minutes ago." Michael was the night aide who worked with Carolyn. Now I was genuinely concerned. Where was everyone? I continued my round, checking the supply closets, bathrooms, break room. Nobody. The medication room door was slightly ajar, which was a violation of hospital policy. It should always be locked. I pushed it open, and my stomach dropped. The place was a mess. Cabinet doors hanging open, pill bottles scattered across the floor, an IV stand knocked over. There had clearly been some kind of struggle, and on the floor near the back wall, a small smear of what looked like blood. That's when I should have called for help. I should have used the landline at the nurses' station to call security base, or even 911, but something stopped me. Call it curiosity or stupidity, but I wanted to figure out what happened before causing a hospital-wide panic. I noticed something else in the medication room. Behind a filing cabinet that had been pushed aside, there was an outline in the wall, a door. I'd been working at Westlake for 3 years and never knew there was a door there. On the floor next to it was Michael's security badge. It must have fallen off during whatever happened. I picked it up, then pushed on the outline in the wall. It swung open with a low creak, revealing a dark corridor. The air that came out was stale, cold, like the place hadn't been opened in decades. I shined my flashlight in, revealing a hallway with peeling paint and old tile flooring, different from the renovated hospital. This had to be part of the original construction. Every instinct told me to turn around, call for backup, do anything but walk into that dark hallway. But Michael and Carolyn could be in trouble. What if someone had broken in, taken them hostage? I couldn't just leave them. I stepped through the doorway, sweeping my flashlight back and forth. The beam caught decades of dust, swirling in the air like tiny ghosts. The corridor stretched about 50 feet before turning left. The walls were lined with old medical posters from what looked like the 30s or 40s, diagrams of the human body, outdated surgical procedures, disease prevention guidelines. As I moved deeper, the hospital sounds faded completely. No beeping monitors, no distant voices, just my footsteps and breathing. The temperature seemed to drop with every step. By the time I reached the turn in the corridor, I could see my breath. I paused at the corner, listening. That's when I heard it. Voices. Low, murmuring voices, and the occasional metallic clink of instruments. I slowly peered around the corner. The hallway opened into what appeared to be an old surgical suite. The room was dimly lit by lights that shouldn't have been working in an abandoned section. 5 figures stood around an operating table, all wearing surgical gowns that looked straight out of a history book, long, white, with caps and masks that covered everything but their eyes. On the table was Nurse Carolyn. She wasn't moving, but I could see her chest rising and falling. She was alive but appeared sedated. The figures were doing something to her, surgical instruments in hand, working methodically. The tallest figure had his back to me. When he spoke, his voice was deep, authoritative. "Retractor, please, Dr. Jensen." One of the others handed him an instrument. I must have made a sound because suddenly all 5 heads turned toward me. The tall one, clearly the leader, stared directly at me. His eyes above the surgical mask were dark, intense. Time seemed to stop as we looked at each other. "Come in, young man," he said calmly, as if finding a security guard spying on them was the most normal thing in the world. "You must be from the new administration." I was frozen, unable to move forward or run away. The tall surgeon took a step toward me. "I'm Dr. Blackwood, Chief of Surgery." My blood went cold. Dr. Blackwood, the name Mrs. Abernathy had mentioned. "What are you doing to Carolyn?" I managed to ask, my voice embarrassingly weak. "Just a routine procedure," he said, as if it was obvious. "We've been conducting our work since 1938, though the current administration tried to wall us off after the incident." The way he said "incident" made my stomach turn. "Where's Michael?" I asked. Dr. Blackwood tilted his head slightly. "Ah, the young aide. He's being prepared for his procedure. We have a schedule to maintain." One of the other surgeons spoke up, a woman's voice. "Dr. Blackwood, we're losing light." I glanced up and noticed the lights were indeed flickering. Dr. Blackwood seemed annoyed. "Always the electricity," he muttered. "It's never been reliable since they tried to shut us down." The lights flickered more violently, and for a second I saw something that made no sense. In the brief moments of darkness, the surgeons changed. Their pristine white coats became stained with dark patches, their faces gaunt and gray beneath their masks. Then the light would return, and they'd look normal again. "You should go now," Dr. Blackwood said. "We have work to complete, but we'll see you again. Everyone joins us eventually." The lights went out completely. I heard movement, footsteps approaching me in the dark. I stumbled backward, hit the wall, then turned and ran blindly down the corridor. I don't remember much of that frantic escape, just darkness, the sound of my own panicked breathing, and the sensation that something was right behind me. I don't know how long I was in that darkness. It felt like hours, but was probably just minutes. When I came to, I was lying on the floor of what appeared to be an empty storage room. No surgical suite, no corridors, just a dusty, unused room with old shelving units and boxes. I was completely alone. My flashlight lay beside me, still on but with dimming batteries. I picked it up with shaking hands and made my way out of the room, finding myself back in the main hallway of the 4th floor. I rushed to the nurse's station, and my heart nearly stopped. Carolyn was there, calmly filling out paperwork. She looked up at me with mild surprise. "Marcus, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't speak at first. I just stared at her, looking for any sign of what I'd seen, any indication she'd been on that operating table. "Where were you?" I finally managed. She frowned. "I've been right here. Had to help Mrs. Thomas in 408 with her breathing treatment, but otherwise I've been at the station all night." She looked concerned. "Are you feeling all right?" "Where's Michael?" I asked. "Break room, I think. His shift ended an hour ago." None of it made sense. I excused myself and went straight to the hospital archives, using my security clearance to access the historical records. What I found chilled me to the bone. Dr. Edward Blackwood was indeed Chief of Surgery at Westlake Memorial from 1932 to 1938. According to the records, he and 4 members of his surgical team died during a procedure when a fire broke out in the East Wing operating room. The fire was contained, but all 5 medical personnel and their patient perished. The wing was rebuilt, and that section was converted to storage, before eventually being incorporated into the long-term care unit during later renovations. 2 weeks after my experience, Michael disappeared during his shift. Security footage showed him entering the 4th floor medication room at midnight but never coming out. The room was searched thoroughly, but no hidden door was found. No trace of Michael has ever been discovered. I quit the next day. I couldn't set foot in that building again. It's been 6 months now. I still drive by Westlake Memorial occasionally, usually late at night when I can't sleep. The fourth-floor windows are always dark, except for one room at the end of the hall. Sometimes, just after midnight, I can see a faint light behind the drawn blinds, the kind of light you'd find in an operating room. I don't know what happened that night, maybe I hallucinated the whole thing. Maybe I had some kind of breakdown, but I know what I saw. And sometimes when I close my eyes to sleep, I can still hear Dr. Blackwood's voice. Everyone joins us eventually. I'm afraid he was right. Story 5. I've been trying to make sense of what's happening to me for weeks now. I don't even know if writing this will help, but I need to get it out somewhere. Maybe someone has gone through something similar. I'm an accountant at Wilson & Brooks, a mid-sized firm in Millbrook's corporate district. Nothing special about the building, just your typical 4-story glass and concrete structure surrounded by a massive parking lot that's never properly lit. I've been working here for almost 3 years, and it's been perfectly normal until recently. About a month ago, our firm landed several new corporate clients, which meant longer hours for everyone in my department. Being single with no kids, I volunteered to handle the late shifts. My co-workers were grateful, and honestly, I didn't mind. By 7 p.m., the office would clear out, and I'd have the entire floor to myself. No distractions, no office chatter, just me and my spreadsheets. Perfect for someone who needs to focus. It was the last Friday of October when things started getting weird. I remember the date clearly because we had a staff meeting that morning about quarterly projections. I'd been working for 12 hours straight, staring at my computer screen until my eyes burned. Around 8 p.m., I decided to step outside for some fresh air. The temperature had dropped significantly after sunset, and that crisp autumn air felt amazing after being cooped up all day. Our parking lot is massive, probably designed for a much larger building, and by that time of night, there were only 5 or 6 cars left, all clustered near the entrance. Mine was among them. I was just standing there, breathing deeply, when I noticed something in the far corner of the lot. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, or maybe one of those concrete barriers. But then I realized it was person-shaped. Someone was standing completely still in the darkest part of the lot, at least 100 yards away. The parking lot lights are these old sodium lamps that flicker constantly and cast everything in this sickly yellow-orange glow. Between the distance and the poor lighting, I couldn't make out any details, just a dark silhouette, completely motionless. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded small in the empty lot. No response, no movement. I told myself it was probably just a security guard doing rounds, or maybe even a shadow from one of the trees at the edge of the property. I went back inside, making sure the door locked behind me. Looking back now, I wish I'd trusted my instincts more. The following Monday and Tuesday passed normally. I was swamped with work and stayed late both nights, but nothing unusual happened. By Wednesday, I'd pretty much forgotten about the figure in the parking lot. That night, I was working on reconciling some accounts around 9:30 p.m. The floor was completely silent except for the hum of the HVAC system and the occasional ping from my computer. I needed coffee desperately, so I headed to the break room at the other end of the floor. Our company implemented this energy-saving initiative last year, which means after 7 p.m., only half the lights stay on in the corridors. It creates these pools of light with shadows in between. Never bothered me before, but that night, walking through those alternating patches of light and dark felt wrong somehow. The break room still smelled like the burnt coffee someone had made hours earlier. What struck me as odd was that the coffee machine was still on. I always assumed the cleaning crew shut everything off when they came through around 7. I made my coffee and started back to my desk. That's when I saw him. At the far end of the corridor where it turns toward the elevator bank, a man was leaning against the wall. He was wearing what looked like a dark hoodie, the hood pulled up so I couldn't see his face. Just standing there, perfectly still, half in shadow. My first thought was that it must be one of the IT guys working late. But we'd just had an email that morning saying IT would be doing system updates remotely that week, so no one would be on site after hours. "Hey," I called out. my voice echoing slightly in the empty hallway. "Building's closed to the public. Are you supposed to be here?" The figure didn't respond, didn't move, just stayed there, partially hidden in the shadows. I took a few steps forward, and that's when he moved, just slid around the corner out of sight. No sound of footsteps, nothing, just gone. I speed-walked back to my office, locked the door, and called security. The guard on duty, an older guy named Frank, who I'd chatted with a few times, came up to check. He did a sweep of the entire floor but found nothing, no sign of anyone. All exterior doors were still locked. All security logs showed no entry after the cleaning crew left. "Maybe it was just shadows playing tricks," Frank suggested. "These old buildings, they can mess with your mind when you're alone." I nodded and thanked him, but I knew what I'd seen. Someone had been there. I finished up my work quickly and left around 10:15 p.m. The entire drive home, I kept checking my rearview mirror, feeling on edge. The next night, I made sure to leave by 7, using the excuse of a dinner appointment. I stopped at the 24-hour convenience store near my apartment to pick up some microwave meals. Bachelor life at its finest. As I was standing at the counter paying, I felt that sensation of being watched. You know that feeling, like a physical weight on the back of your neck? I casually glanced out the store window and froze. Across the street, under one of the streetlights, was a man in a dark hoodie, standing perfectly still, looking directly at me. The cashier had to ask me twice if I wanted my receipt. I mumbled something and rushed out to my car, nearly dropping my keys in the process. By the time I looked back at the streetlight, the figure was gone. This wasn't coincidence anymore. This wasn't my imagination. Someone was following me. The next day was Friday, and I called in sick. I spent the weekend locked in my apartment, jumping at every sound in the hallway. By Sunday night, I'd convinced myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was just some random guy both times. Maybe the stress and long hours were getting to me. Monday morning, I went back to work. I told my supervisor I needed to scale back my hours due to some personal matters, and he was understanding. For the next week, I left exactly at 5 p.m. with everyone else. No incidents, no sightings. I started to relax a little. Then came the new client emergency, a massive audit that needed immediate attention. My supervisor apologetically asked if I could stay late just for this one night. I agreed, but only if the security guard would check my floor hourly. Everything was fine until about 8:30 p.m. I was working intently when I noticed my office had gotten darker. Looking up, I realized the hallway lights outside my door had gone out. Just the section right outside my office. The rest of the corridor was still dimly lit. I called security, but no one answered. After 3 tries, I decided to pack up and leave. I wasn't about to investigate on my own. As I gathered my things, my computer screen flickered. Just for a second, but enough to make me pause. Then my office phone rang, startling me so badly I knocked over my coffee mug. The caller ID showed internal. I hesitated, then picked up. Silence, then breathing. Then a click as the line disconnected. I grabbed my bag and practically ran to the elevator. The ride down to the lobby felt endless. When the doors finally opened, I was relieved to see the security desk, but no one was there. Frank's coffee cup was still steaming, his logbook open, but no Frank. I didn't wait around to find out where he'd gone. I headed straight for my car, using my phone's flashlight to navigate the poorly lit parking lot. My car was one of only 3 left. When I reached it, my heart nearly stopped. There was something on my passenger window, a piece of paper taped to the glass. With shaking hands, I pulled it off and read the 4 words written in black marker, "You see me now." I threw the note on the ground, jumped in my car, and peeled out of that parking lot faster than I've ever driven. The entire way home, I kept checking my mirrors, convinced someone was following me. That was 2 weeks ago. I quit my job the next day, citing a health emergency. I've been working remotely for a different firm since then. I installed a security camera in my car and at my apartment door. I've changed my routine completely. Different grocery store, different gym, different coffee shop. I haven't seen the hooded man since that night, but that doesn't mean he's gone. Yesterday, I was sorting through some old work files and found something that made my blood run cold. A security access log from 3 months ago showed someone using my key card to enter the building at 2 in the morning on a Sunday. I have never been to the office at that time. Never. So now I sit here typing this out, wondering how long he's been watching me. Was it really just a month ago that this started, or has he been there all along, and I only recently began to notice? I feel eyes on me constantly, when I'm in public, when I'm in my apartment, even now as I write this, like he's reading over my shoulder. The worst part is not knowing what he wants. Why me? Why now? Is he waiting for something specific? Or is the watching itself the point? All I know is that somewhere out there, a man in a dark hoodie is watching and waiting. And someday, I'll turn a corner or open a door, and instead of just seeing him, I'll finally find out why he's been watching me all this time, and that terrifies me more than anything. Story 6. I still get anxious whenever I hear a phone ring late at night. It's been 8 months since I quit my job at Dolly's Diner in Riverdale, but some habits are hard to break. I keep checking my locks twice before bed. I still pull the curtains shut as soon as the sun sets, and I still flinch when I see a bald man with a beard. I took the night shift at Dolly's because the pay was decent and I needed the money for college. The hours were rough, 11 at night until 7 in the morning, but I adjusted to the schedule after a few weeks. It was mostly truckers passing through, college kids with late-night munchies, and the occasional drunk who needed coffee before heading home. The diner itself was nothing special, just your typical roadside place with vinyl booths, fluorescent lighting that buzzed constantly, and a jukebox that ate quarters without playing anything. The owner, Martha, was rarely there at night, so it was usually just me handling the front and Naldo working the kitchen. Naldo was this grumpy old guy in his 50s who barely spoke to me except to grunt when orders were ready. He'd been working there for like 20 years and treated the kitchen like his personal kingdom. He wasn't friendly, but he was reliable, which is all that mattered during those long overnight shifts. The nights were mostly uneventful. I'd wipe down tables, refill coffee cups, and scroll through my phone when things got slow. Sometimes I'd go hours without seeing a customer, especially between 3 and 5 in the morning. Those were the hours when the emptiness of the place would creep up on me, just the humming of the refrigerators and the occasional car passing by on the highway. That's when Daniel first started coming in. I remember the first time I saw him clearly. It was around 2:30 in the morning on a Tuesday in January. He walked in wearing this worn brown leather jacket that looked like he'd had it forever. He was tall, probably 6'2", with broad shoulders and this thick beard that was neatly trimmed. His head was completely bald and shiny under the harsh diner lights. He didn't smile when he came in, just nodded at me and sat at the counter. "Just coffee, Black," he said. His voice was deep but quiet. I poured him a cup and he sat there in silence, occasionally looking up at the muted TV in the corner showing some old Western movie. He stayed for about 45 minutes, left a $5 tip for a $2 coffee, and walked out without saying another word. After that, he started coming in regularly, always between 2 and 3 in the morning, always on Tuesdays and Thursdays, always the same routine: black coffee, silent sitting, generous tip. I didn't think much of it. Working night shift, you get used to people with odd schedules and routines. About a month into this pattern, things changed. He started coming in every night instead of just twice a week, and he started watching me. Not in the casual way customers sometimes do when they're bored. This was different. He would follow me with his eyes as I moved around the diner, barely blinking. If I went to the kitchen to grab an order, his head would turn to track me until I returned. I tried to ignore it at first. Night shift attracts all types, and I'd dealt with creepy customers before. But then he started asking questions. "You work here every night?" he asked one evening as I refilled his coffee. "Yeah, the overnight shift," I said, trying to keep it casual. "You live nearby?" I gave a vague answer about living in town and quickly moved to another table. But each night, the questions got more personal. Did I have a boyfriend? What time did I get off work? Did I walk home alone? With each question, that knot in my stomach grew tighter. Then came the comments. Little things at first that could be brushed off as awkward attempts at compliments. "That uniform fits you real nice," he said one night, his eyes lingering too long. Then they got worse. "You got such delicate wrists," he said another time, reaching out like he wanted to touch me before I pulled away. "So easy to grab onto." The tips got bigger too. $20 for a coffee, $50 one night when all he ordered was toast. It felt like he was trying to buy something from me, something I wasn't selling. One night in late February, he came in with a small box. It was wrapped in shiny blue paper with a silver ribbon. He pushed it across the counter to me. "Got you something," he said, his eyes never leaving my face. "I can't accept gifts from customers," I told him, pushing it back. "Just open it." His voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. "Really, I can't." "It's just a necklace," he interrupted, his jaw tight. "I saw it and thought of you." I felt Naldo watching from the kitchen window, which gave me a bit of courage. "Thank you, but no, it's against policy." Daniel's face changed then. His eyes hardened and his mouth twitched in a way that made my skin crawl. He stood up, towering over me across the counter. "You know," he said quietly, "place like this, empty most nights. Just you and that old man back there. Wouldn't be hard for someone to overpower you both." He didn't phrase it as a threat exactly, but the meaning was clear. He left the gift on the counter and walked out, leaving me shaking. I told Naldo what happened, and he just grunted and said to call the cops if the guy came back. Real helpful. I threw the box in the dumpster without opening it and tried to forget about it. For the next week, Daniel didn't show up. I started to relax a little, thinking maybe he'd moved on or found another late-night spot to haunt. Then the calls started. They always came right at closing time, 7 in. The morning, when Naldo had already left and I was alone doing final cleanup. The phone would ring, and when I answered, there would be silence for a few seconds, then breathing, then he would say my name, Melissa. The first time it happened, I hung up immediately. The second time I asked who it was, even though I knew. He just repeated my name and then said, "I miss watching you." I hung up and called Martha, who said she'd talked to the police but didn't seem too concerned. This went on for 3 weeks. The calls became more frequent, sometimes multiple times during my shift. Some nights, he would just breathe. Other nights he would describe what I was wearing that day, or mention seeing me at the grocery store or at the laundromat near my apartment. He was watching me outside of work. I started having a friend pick me up after shifts. I changed my walking routes. I kept my blinds closed at all times. Sleep became impossible without the lights on. Then, on a rainy Thursday in April, at about 3 in the morning, the bell above the door jingled. I looked up from wiping down a table and froze. Daniel stood there soaking wet, his leather jacket darkened by the rain. The diner was completely empty except for us. "Haven't seen you in a while," he said, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. My throat went dry. "Coffee?" I managed to ask, trying to act normal while I figured out what to do. Naldo was in the back, but he usually wore headphones while he cleaned the grill. "Sure," Daniel said, taking his usual seat at the counter. Missed our little talks. I poured his coffee with shaking hands, keeping as much distance as possible. I noticed his knuckles were scraped and red like he'd been in a fight. "You didn't like my gift," he said, not touching the coffee. That hurt my feelings. "Like I said, we can't accept—" "I saw you throw it in the trash," he cut me off, "watched from my car." My blood went cold. "I think you should leave." He laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the empty diner. "After I came all this way to see you? That's not very friendly, Melissa." The way he said my name made my skin crawl. I reached for my phone in my apron pocket. "Who are you calling?" he asked, his voice suddenly hard. "No one." I lied. I need to check something in the kitchen. I turned to walk away, but felt his hand grab my wrist, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. I hadn't even heard him move from his seat. "Don't lie to me," he hissed, yanking me toward him. "We're having a conversation." Pure instinct took over. I grabbed the coffee pot with my free hand and smashed it against the side of his head. Hot coffee and glass went everywhere. He let go of my wrist and staggered back, blood mixing with coffee on his face. I ran for the kitchen, screaming for Naldo. I could hear Daniel cursing and knocking over stools behind me. I pushed through the swinging doors and found Naldo, wide-eyed, already reaching for a meat cleaver. "Call 911, I gasped, fumbling for the phone on the wall. Naldo pushed past me toward the dining area, cleaver in hand. I punched in the numbers with trembling fingers and nearly collapsed against the wall as the dispatcher answered. By the time the police arrived, 7 minutes later, Daniel was gone. The only evidence of what happened was the shattered coffee pot, a small smear of blood on the floor, and the bruises forming around my wrist. The police took my statement and Naldo's. They checked the parking lot and surrounding streets but found nothing. They promised to keep an eye on the diner and took down Daniel's description, but I could tell they didn't think he'd come back. I quit that night. Handed Martha my apron the next morning and told her I couldn't do it anymore. She understood, said she'd been worried about me working those late hours alone anyway. I changed my phone number the same day. I stopped going to my usual places, the laundromat, the grocery store, even the coffee shop, where I used to study. I stayed with a friend for a week, then moved back in with my parents in another town. The police never found him. They said without a last name or address, there wasn't much they could do besides keep an eye out. They suggested he was probably just passing through town, maybe a long-haul trucker with a route that brought him by regularly. But I know better. The way he watched me, how he knew my schedule, my habits, that wasn't random, that was calculated. And sometimes, when the phone rings late at night, I still freeze, expecting to hear breathing on the other end, followed by my name in that voice I can't forget. I don't work night shifts anymore. I don't work anywhere that stays open past 8. And I still check my locks twice before bed. Story 7. I still can't sleep right. 3 weeks have passed and I keep seeing her face whenever I close my eyes. I'm writing this down, hoping it might help me process what happened, because honestly, I don't know what else to do. I was driving from Phoenix to Seattle for a new job. The drive is brutal, about 24 hours straight through, so I planned to do it over 3 days with overnight stops. Everything was going fine until the second night when I hit this monster rainstorm somewhere in northern Oregon. It was around midnight, and I'd been driving for almost 14 hours that day. The rain was coming down so hard I could barely see 10 feet in front of me, and my windshield wipers couldn't keep up. I spotted a sign for a rest area and decided to pull over until the storm let up. When I exited the highway, there were no other cars around. The place was completely deserted, just this little concrete building with bathrooms and a small covered area with vending machines. I parked under one of the few lights in the lot, locked my doors, and reclined my seat. I figured I'd take a quick nap, maybe 30 minutes, then continue once the rain eased up. I must have dozed off for a few minutes when I heard a tapping on my window. I nearly jumped out of my skin. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. There was a woman standing outside my car. She was absolutely drenched, wearing this thin blue dress that was plastered to her body. Her dark hair was streaming water down her face. I hesitated because who wouldn't? It's the middle of the night, I'm alone at a deserted rest stop, and there's a stranger at my window, but she looked so helpless standing there in the rain, hugging herself and shivering. I cracked my window just enough to hear her over the downpour. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she said, her voice surprisingly calm despite her condition. "My car broke down about a mile back. Could you possibly give me a ride to the next town? I wouldn't ask, but there's no cell service out here." I looked around the parking lot again, still completely empty. No other cars, no sign of anyone else, just me and this woman in the blue dress. "What's your name?" I asked, stalling while I tried to decide what to do. "Elizabeth," she said with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Elizabeth Carver." I'm not usually the type to pick up strangers, especially at midnight in the middle of nowhere, but something about her seemed so vulnerable. I told her my name was Rebecca and unlocked the passenger door. "Thank you so much," she said as she slid into the seat. "You're very kind." The moment she got in, I swear the temperature in my car dropped at least 10 degrees. I blamed it on the rain and cranked up the heat. What struck me as odd was that she didn't seem to be trying to dry off at all. Her dress was soaking wet, but she just sat there, water pooling beneath her, hands folded in her lap. I pulled back onto the highway, relieved to see the rain was starting to let up a little. "So where exactly are you headed?" I asked. "Millridge," she said. "It's about 20 miles up the road." I nodded, and we drove in silence for a while. I tried making small talk, asked where she was coming from, if she had family in Millridge, but her answers were vague. She said she was going to meet someone very important, but didn't elaborate. The whole time her clothes never seemed to dry, even with the heater blasting. After about 15 minutes, I noticed something else strange. Elizabeth kept glancing at the dashboard clock, then out the window, then back at the clock. Her fingers were fidgeting with something around her wrist that I couldn't quite make out in the darkness. "Are you in a hurry to get somewhere?" I asked. "Yes," she whispered. "I need to be there by 1:17, precisely 1:17. The specific time struck me as odd, but I figured maybe she had arranged for someone to meet her. We continued driving, and I started seeing signs for Millridge 5 miles ahead. That's when things got really weird. "No, not this way," Elizabeth suddenly said, her voice taking on an urgent edge. "You need to take exit 27. It's a shortcut." I slowed down a bit, confused. "I don't see any signs for exit 27. It's unmarked. It's coming up on the right in about half a mile." I squinted through the windshield and saw what looked like a dirt road cutting into dense forest. There was no exit sign, no lighting, nothing to indicate it was an actual road and not just some service access. "I don't think that's an actual exit," I said. "Let's stick to the highway. Millridge is only a few more miles." Elizabeth's hand shot out and grabbed my arm. Her fingers were ice cold and wet, like she'd just pulled them from freezing water. "Please," she said, her voice tight with desperation. "I need to take that road. I need to be there by 1:17. I pulled my arm away, genuinely freaked out now. "I'm sorry, but I'm not driving down some unmarked dirt road in the middle of the night." Her expression changed then, something flickering behind her eyes. She reached for the steering wheel, and I jerked away, nearly swerving into the other lane. "What are you doing?" I shouted, adrenaline spiking through me. She sat back in her seat, suddenly calm again. "It won't matter," she said softly. "We'll still arrive in time." I was seriously considering pulling over and telling her to get out, but we were already approaching the exit for Millridge. I took it, telling myself I'd drop her at a gas station or diner and be on my way. But Millridge wasn't what I expected. As we drove into town, I noticed there were no lights on anywhere. The main street was lined with darkened storefronts, many with boarded windows. No cars were parked along the curbs. No people walked the sidewalks. It looked completely abandoned. "Are you sure this is the right place?" I asked, slowing to a crawl. "It looks like a ghost town." Elizabeth nodded slowly. "Tonight you're seeing it as it really is." I didn't know what to make of that comment, but it sent a chill up my spine. The dashboard clock read 1:12 a.m. "Where exactly am I taking you?" I asked, trying to keep the nervousness out of my voice. "The town center," she replied. "Just a little further." I drove deeper into the deserted town, past darkened houses and empty shops. The only sound was the hum of my engine and the occasional splash as we drove through puddles from the earlier rain. My headlights cut through the darkness, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out like fingers. When we reached what I assumed was the town center, a small park with a gazebo, I saw something that made my stomach drop. My headlights illuminated a memorial of some kind, surrounded by faded flowers and weathered stuffed animals. It reminded me of those roadside memorials for accident victims, except this one was in the middle of the town square. I stopped the car, unable to go further. I was breathing hard now, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. What is this place? Elizabeth turned to look at me, and for the first time, I noticed something I hadn't before. Despite the darkness, her eyes reflected no light. They were like two black pools. I died here, she said simply. 40 years ago today, at exactly 1:17 a.m. The dashboard clock now read 1:15 a.m. I tried to start the car again, but the engine wouldn't turn over. I pressed the gas pedal frantically, but nothing happened. A truck driver fell asleep at the wheel, Elizabeth continued, her voice distant. He crashed into my car right here, at this intersection. I was on my way to meet James, my fiancé. We were going to elope that night. 1:16 a.m. I kept trying to start the car, my fingers fumbling with the keys. The temperature inside had dropped so low I could see my breath. Elizabeth sat motionless beside me, water still dripping from her hair, from her dress, forming a puddle beneath her feet. I've been trying to complete my journey for 40 years, she whispered. Every year on this night, I try again. I need to get to him. He's waiting for me in Ashland. 1:17 a.m. I couldn't move. It was like my body was frozen to the seat. Outside the windows, the world began to change. Lights flickered on in the buildings, cars appeared on the streets, people walked along the sidewalks, but everything was moving in reverse like a film being rewound, and then suddenly, everything stopped. Through the windshield, I saw a massive truck suspended in mid-air, its headlights blazing mere feet from the driver's side of my car. The truck driver's face was visible, his eyes closed, his head nodding forward in sleep. Time had frozen at the exact moment before impact. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I turned to look at Elizabeth, but she was gone. In her place sat a different woman, younger, her blue dress dry and pristine, her dark hair perfectly styled. She was smiling, looking ahead through the windshield, completely unaware of the truck about to hit her. And then, everything went black. I woke up with sunlight streaming through my windshield. I was back at the rest stop where I'd pulled over during the rainstorm. My car was parked exactly where I'd left it, engine off, keys in the ignition. The rain had stopped and morning light filtered through the trees surrounding the parking lot. For a moment I thought I'd dreamed the whole thing, but then I noticed the passenger seat beside me was soaking wet, a small puddle of water on the floor mat below it. And there, gleaming in the center of the puddle, was a silver bracelet. I picked it up with trembling fingers and read the inscription on the inside. To Elizabeth, all my love, James. Later that day, at a library in the next town over, I found old newspaper articles about the accident. Elizabeth Carver had indeed died 40 years earlier when a semi-truck crashed into her car in downtown Millridge. The article mentioned a local legend about motorists occasionally picking up a young woman in a blue dress near the site of the accident. But here's the thing that's kept me awake every night since. The article said Elizabeth wasn't trying to relive her death. She was trying to complete her journey. She had been on her way to Ashland, just 30 miles past Millridge, where James had been waiting to elope with her. She never made it. I'm writing this from a motel in Ashland. Tomorrow I'm going to the local cemetery to find James's grave. I need to leave Elizabeth's bracelet there. Maybe then she can finally complete her journey and find peace. And maybe then I'll be able to sleep without seeing her face or that truck frozen in midair, just seconds before impact. I don't know if I helped her or if she used me somehow. All I know is that some journeys are never truly finished, and some roads lead to places we can't possibly understand. Story 8. I never believed in ghosts before I took that security job at Crestview Towers. Now I'm not sure what to believe anymore. It was supposed to be the perfect gig for a broke law school applicant. 12-hour overnight shifts, minimal responsibilities, and plenty of downtime to study for my LSAT. The building manager, Mrs. Reynolds, made it sound like I'd basically be getting paid to sit and read. Just hourly rounds, monitoring the security feeds and logging any maintenance issues, she explained during my interview. Most nights, you won't see a soul. The pay was decent enough, $17 an hour, and the building itself was impressive. Crestview Towers had once been the Hargrove Manufacturing Company building back in the 20s, but it had been converted into luxury apartments about a decade ago. They kept a lot of the industrial charm: exposed brick, high ceilings, original hardwood floors. The lobby had this gorgeous Art Deco chandelier that I'm pretty sure cost more than my car. During training, Mrs. Reynolds showed me the security office, a converted storage room behind the lobby desk, how to work the camera system, and the route for hourly rounds. The only thing that seemed remotely intimidating was the freight elevator. "This is only for move-ins, move-outs, and maintenance," she explained. Unlike the sleek modern passenger elevators, this thing was a monster, easily 15 feet deep with a manual gate you had to pull across. The control panel was all original brass, with an old analog needle indicator above the door showing what floor it was on. It gets shut down at 10 each night and reactivated at 6 in the morning. For the first 2 weeks, everything was exactly as advertised: quiet, boring, perfect. I'd do my rounds, check the cameras, and spend the rest of my time highlighting LSAT prep books. I was getting into a comfortable routine until my 3rd week on the job. I was doing my 3 a.m. round when I noticed something odd on the security monitor. The needle on the freight elevator indicator was moving. According to the display, it was traveling between the 12th and 14th floors. But that couldn't be right. The elevator was supposed to be deactivated hours ago. I radioed the maintenance supervisor. "Hey, this is Jackson at security. The freight elevator is showing activity. Is anyone working up there?" After a minute of static, a gruff voice responded. "This is Simon. I'll check it out. Stay at your desk." I'd never met Simon before. He worked days while I worked nights, and our paths had never crossed. About 15 minutes later, the lobby doors slid open, and an older man with silver hair and coveralls walked in carrying a toolbox and some other equipment I couldn't identify. "You the security guy?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. "I'll handle the elevator. Probably just a sensor issue." I followed him across the lobby. "Should I come with you? I should document this for the incident log." Simon shook his head. "No need. Just a routine check." As we approached the freight elevator, I noticed him pull something from his pocket, a small cloth bag. When we reached the elevator doors, he poured what looked like salt in a thin line across the threshold. "What's that for?" I asked. He ignored my question and pulled out some kind of electronic device with a digital readout. "Temperature fluctuations," he muttered, seemingly to himself. "Always drops before it starts." "Before what starts?" Simon finally looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Nothing to worry about. Go back to your desk. I've got this handled." Something about his dismissive attitude bothered me, but I didn't want to cause trouble in my first month. I returned to the security office and watched the camera feed. Simon stood outside the elevator for about 20 minutes, occasionally checking his device and adding more salt to the line. Then he packed up and left without a word. The elevator indicator stopped moving. The next morning, I checked the maintenance log to see if Simon had documented the issue. There was nothing. I made my own entry about the elevator activity but didn't mention the salt or the weird device. It sounded too bizarre, even to me. That afternoon, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. I looked up the history of Crestview Towers online. Most articles focused on the luxury conversion, but I eventually found an old newspaper archive with information about the Hargrove Manufacturing Company. And then I found it, a headline from 1951. "Tragedy at Hargrove. 7 workers killed in elevator accident." According to the article, 7 workers had been killed when the freight elevator plummeted from the 18th floor to the basement. The cause was determined to be inadequate maintenance and cost-cutting measures by the company. Among those quoted was Simon Hargrove II, son of the company's founder, who promised a full investigation. My blood ran cold. Hargrove. Simon. It couldn't be a coincidence. When I went to work that night, I asked the evening doorman, Eduardo, about the maintenance supervisor. Simon? We don't have a maintenance supervisor named Simon, he said, looking confused. The head of maintenance is Dave Williams. Been here since the conversion. Older guy, silver hair, works days, I pressed. Eduardo shook his head. Dave's maybe 40, balding. I don't know who you met, but it wasn't our maintenance supervisor. I tried to convince myself I'd misheard the name on the radio. Maybe he'd said Simmons or something similar. But deep down, I knew what I'd heard. That night, I paid special attention to the freight elevator during my rounds. Everything seemed normal until around 2:15 a.m., when the temperature in the lobby suddenly dropped. I could see my breath fogging in front of my face, and then the elevator indicator began to move again, this time from the basement up toward the 18th floor. I checked the security camera for the 18th floor hallway, the elevator. Doors there were closed, but as I watched, the indicator needle reached 18 and stopped. Nothing happened for several minutes. Then, suddenly, the needle plummeted rapidly toward the basement. My heart was racing. I didn't know what to do. Call the police? What would I say? That an elevator that's supposed to be shut down is moving by itself? I'd sound crazy. Instead, I decided to investigate further. I pulled up the resident directory on the computer system. If Simon Hargrove II had been involved with the company in 1951, any living relative would be quite old now. I searched for the name Hargrove and found one entry. Simon Hargrove III, apartment 1851, 18th floor, 51, the year of the accident. This couldn't be a coincidence either. I decided to break protocol and leave the security desk unattended. I took the regular elevator to the 18th floor. The hallway was silent and dimly lit by wall sconces. I found apartment 1851 at the end of the corridor near the freight elevator. Taking a deep breath, I knocked. It took a while, but eventually the door opened to reveal an elderly man with familiar silver hair. He didn't seem surprised to see me. "You're the new security guard," he said, not a question. "Yes, sir. Jackson Miller. I'm sorry to bother you so late, but I've been experiencing some strange things with the freight elevator, and I found an article about an accident back in 1951 involving your family's company." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "You'd better come in." The apartment was like stepping back in time. Vintage furniture, old photographs on the walls, and a collection of mechanical tools displayed in a glass case. He gestured for me to sit in an armchair while he lowered himself onto a worn leather sofa. "You met Simon already, didn't you?" he asked. I think so. Last night when the elevator was moving. That was my father," he said matter-of-factly. "Simon Hargrove Jr." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Sir, if your father was running the company in 1951, he'd have to be..." "Dead?" "Yes, for 30 years now." He said it so calmly that I almost thought I'd misheard him. "But his work isn't finished, and neither is mine." He explained that his father had been devastated by the accident. The company had cut corners on maintenance to save money during a difficult financial period. After the deaths, Simon Jr. became obsessed with making amends. According to his son, he'd discovered something unusual about the elevator. On certain nights, particularly around the anniversary of the accident, the spirits of the dead workers would relive their final moments. "My father developed a method to detect when the cycle was about to begin," the old man continued. "The salt creates a barrier. The device measures electromagnetic fluctuations and temperature drops. He spent the rest of his life trying to break the cycle and free those souls." I should have thought he was crazy, but after what I'd seen, I couldn't dismiss it so easily. "And now you continue his work?" I asked. "I try, but I'm getting too old, and the cycle is getting stronger. They're stuck, you see, trapped in that moment of terror over and over again for 70 years. As if on cue, the lights in the apartment flickered. The old man looked at his watch and frowned. It's happening again, earlier than usual. The anniversary is approaching. He stood up with effort and went to a drawer, pulling out what looked like an old brass key. This is the master key to the original elevator controls. My grandfather had it made. If you're brave enough, you can help them. How? I asked, taking the key hesitantly. Ride the elevator down when it happens. Use the key on the control panel. There's a hidden switch behind the emergency stop button. It will take you to a floor that doesn't exist anymore. Level R. What's on level R? The past, he said simply. A chance to change things. Before I could ask more questions, we heard a mechanical groan from the hallway. The freight elevator was moving again. The old man pressed the key firmly into my palm. It's your choice, but those 7 people have been suffering for decades. You can help end it. I don't know why I did what I did next. Maybe curiosity. Maybe I felt compelled. But I left his apartment and walked to the freight elevator. The needle showed it was ascending again, coming up from the basement. When it reached the 18th floor, the gate slid open on its own. The elevator was empty, but it felt heavy somehow, like the air inside was dense with something I couldn't see. I stepped in, my heart pounding. Using the key, I found the hidden switch behind the emergency stop button. When I turned it, a new button illuminated on the control panel, a faded brass R. I pressed it. The elevator began to descend slowly, the lights flickering. The descent seemed to last forever, much longer than it would take to reach the basement. Finally, it stopped with a jolt, and the gate opened automatically. I wasn't prepared for what I saw. Instead of the building's basement, I was looking at a busy factory floor. Men in work clothes operated machinery that looked straight out of the 1950s. The air was filled with the sounds of metal being shaped and the shouts of workers. No one seemed to notice me or the elevator at first. I stepped out cautiously, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. These had to be the workers from the accident, somehow caught in a loop of time before their deaths. I spotted one man checking his pocket watch, then calling to the others. 7 men began walking toward the elevator, toward me. I recognized one of them as a much younger version of Simon Hargrove Jr. As they approached, I noticed something about the elevator cable visible above. It was fraying, with several strands already broken. This was it, the moment before the disaster. Without thinking, I called out, "Stop! The cable's going to break." They froze, looking at me in confusion. The youngest of them, barely more than a teenager, spoke up. "Who are you? You don't work here." "Please, listen to me," I begged. "The elevator isn't safe. The cable is damaged. If you all get on, it's going to fall." The young Simon stepped forward, examining the cable I was pointing at. His eyes widened. "He's right. Look at that fraying. We need to report this right away." The men gathered around, all looking up at the cable. Something strange began to happen. The factory around us started to fade, like mist burning away in sunlight. The workers looked at each other, then at me, with dawning recognition in their eyes. "We've been here before," one of them said slowly. "Many times." The young Simon locked eyes with me. "Thank you," he said, his voice fading like the rest of the scene. "Tell my son. Tell him it wasn't his fault." And then they were gone. The elevator gate closed automatically, and I was moving again. When it stopped and opened, I was back on the 18th floor of Crestview Towers. The hallway was empty and silent. I immediately went back to apartment 1851 and knocked. No answer. I knocked louder, called out, but nothing. Eventually, a neighbor poked her head out. "Are you looking for someone?" she asked. "Yes, Mr. Hargrove, Simon Hargrove III." She looked confused. "That apartment's been empty for years. They've been renovating it since 2014. No one lives there." I couldn't believe it. I'd just been inside talking to him less than an hour ago. I went back to the security desk in a daze and pulled up the apartment records. Sure enough, apartment 1851 was listed as vacant under renovation. I quit that job the next day. I couldn't bring myself to go back after what happened. I never told anyone the full story until now. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, but I still have the brass key. And sometimes when I'm driving past Crestview Towers, I look up at the 18th floor and wonder about Simon Hargrove and those 7 workers who were trapped in time for 70 years. I don't know if I broke the cycle or became part of it. All I know is that the freight elevator at Crestview Towers isn't just an elevator, and some buildings hold more than just the living. Story 9. I still wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, gasping for air, feeling like I'm drowning. It's been almost 4 years since that weekend at the Watterson house, but the memories still haunt me like it happened yesterday. I was so excited when I first got the listing. I'm a real estate agent, or I was anyway, in Cravens Mill, Minnesota. Small town, beautiful scenery, and usually a pretty easy market to work in. The Watterson property was different though. It was this gorgeous 3-story Victorian on the northern shore of Midnight Lake, about 15 minutes outside town. Old money, prestigious family name. The kind of property that should have been snapped up immediately. But it had been sitting on the market for months by the time it landed on my desk in the summer of 2019. The price had already been reduced twice. My boss basically dumped it on me, saying, "Good luck with this one, Sarah." I remember feeling so confident. I thought this would be my big break. The commission on a place like that would set me up for the whole year. The first red flag should have been how people in town reacted when I mentioned I was handling the Watterson place. They'd get this look on their face, not exactly fear, more like concern. They'd change the subject or suddenly remember they had somewhere to be. I figured it was just small-town superstition. Old houses always have rumors. After the third showing ended with the potential buyers practically running to their car, I knew I needed a different approach. The couple had been super interested based on the photos, but something about being in the house had spooked them. They wouldn't even tell me what it was, just that the place didn't feel right. So I called my colleague Michael, who specializes in historic properties and architecture. I figured if we spent a weekend there, I could learn all the selling points, the history, the architectural details, and maybe figure out what was making people so uncomfortable. We arrived on a Friday afternoon in late August. The house truly was stunning. High ceilings, ornate woodwork, huge windows overlooking the lake. It had been mostly emptied of furniture but still had some basic pieces and decoration. The electricity and water were on, and the previous listing agent had left detailed notes about the heating system, the plumbing, all that practical stuff. The first night was uneventful. We ordered pizza, drank some wine, and went through the property documents. Michael was in his element, pointing out the original crown molding, the hand-carved banister, all the details I'd never have noticed. We each took a bedroom on the second floor. There were 5 to choose from. I picked the master suite that faced the lake. I woke up around 2 in the morning because of the sound of water. Not dripping or anything. It was the sound of the lake itself, waves lapping against the shore. But it was so loud, like the water was right outside my window, not 100 feet away down a gentle slope. I got up to look, and that's when I noticed there wasn't any wind. The lake surface should have been completely still, but there were these small, regular waves hitting the shoreline. I convinced myself it was just boats on the other side of the lake or something normal like that. I went back to bed but couldn't shake this feeling of unease. The next morning, I didn't mention it to Michael. It seemed silly in the daylight. We spent the day taking photos, measuring rooms, and exploring the grounds. Everything was going fine until around 3 in the afternoon when a car pulled into the driveway. It was an elderly woman who introduced herself as Eleanor Marsh. She said she'd lived on the lake her whole life and knew the Watterson family well. She seemed nervous, kept wringing her hands and glancing at the water. "I saw your car here overnight," she said. "Nobody stays in this house overnight anymore." That's when she told us what happened in 1987. The Watterson family had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, all under 10. One summer evening, while their parents were inside preparing dinner, the kids took the rowboat out on the lake. Nobody knows exactly what happened, but the boat capsized. All 3 children drowned. The worst part was how they found them, in a perfect triangle pattern in the deepest part of the lake, like they'd been placed there. like they'd been arranged. After the funeral, strange things started happening at the house. Unexplained water damage in rooms that weren't near any plumbing, children's toys and clothes appearing on the shore even though the parents had packed everything away. And every year, on the anniversary of the drowning, the lake would rise, but only around the Watterson property. Mrs. Watterson started claiming she saw her children standing on the shore at night, dripping wet, trying to tell her something. No one believed her, of course. Then Mr. Watterson died of a heart attack in 1990, and Mrs. Watterson moved to Florida, refusing to ever come back to Minnesota. Eleanor left after making us promise we wouldn't stay another night. Of course, we didn't listen. Michael was skeptical. He thought she was just a bored old woman trying to scare us with local folklore. I wasn't so sure, but I also wasn't about to let some ghost story scare me out of a major commission. That evening we were sitting on the back porch watching the sunset over the lake when I noticed something strange. 3 ripples moving from the center of the lake toward the shore. Not like normal ripples that spread outward, these were moving in straight lines, like something was pushing the water from underneath. We went inside as it got dark. The house felt different somehow, colder, despite the fact that it was a warm August night. Michael checked the thermostat and said the heating was running at full capacity, but it felt like we were standing in a freezer. I decided to take a hot shower to warm up. The water pressure was surprisingly good for an old house, but as I was finishing, the water suddenly went ice cold. Not gradually, instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. I jumped out, shivering and cursing. When I got back to my room, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was water on the floor. Not from my wet feet, this was a puddle, seeping in from the wall facing the lake. The wall was completely dry to the touch, but water was somehow coming through it. I looked at my phone. It was 3:17 in the morning. I went to get Michael, but he was already awake, standing in the hallway, looking pale. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. That's when I noticed it. Every water fixture in the house was running. Every faucet, every shower, every toilet. The sound of rushing water was coming from everywhere at once. We ran downstairs, checking bathrooms and the kitchen, turning everything off. But as soon as we'd turn one off, we'd hear another start up again. It was like the house was fighting us. Through the living room window, I saw something that still gives me nightmares. 3 small figures standing at the water's edge. They were backlit by the moon reflecting off the lake, so I couldn't see their faces, but they were clearly children. They were completely still, just staring at the house. Michael saw them too. He decided to go outside. I begged him not to, but he insisted. I watched from the window as he approached the shore. The 3 figures didn't move. When he got within about 20 feet, they took a step backward, in perfect unison, into the water. Michael stopped. I could see him saying something, but I couldn't hear what. Then he took another step forward, and the figures took another step back, now ankle-deep in the lake. I ran outside, calling his name. By the time I reached him, the figures were waist-deep in the water, still facing us, still moving backward in perfect synchronization. "They're saying something," Michael whispered, his face ashen. I couldn't hear anything except the lapping of the waves, which had gotten louder, more insistent. "What are they saying?" I asked, my voice shaking. "It's not deep enough to save you," he said. The 3 figures submerged completely, all at once, like they were being pulled under. The lake went completely still. We didn't stay to pack our things. We grabbed our phones and car keys and drove straight out of there, not stopping until we reached the town. We spent the rest of the night in a motel, neither of us able to sleep. 2 days later, a freak storm hit Craven's Mill. Midnight Lake overflowed its banks, flooding several properties. The Watterson house suffered the worst damage, like the water had specifically targeted it. When a construction crew went to assess the damage, they found something in the foundation. 3 sets of small footprints embedded in the concrete. Children's footprints facing inward, toward the house. The concrete had been poured shortly after the drowning incident, during renovations that Mr. Watterson had personally overseen. A carbon dating test confirmed it. Those footprints had been preserved in that concrete for over 30 years. One of the original construction workers came forward and said that Mr. Watterson had insisted on pouring that section of the foundation himself, late at night. He'd said it was a family matter and something about making sure his children would always have a way home. I quit real estate after that, moved away from Craven's Mill. I don't go near lakes anymore. Someone asked me once why I left, and all I could say was, lakes remember what they take. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone else, but it's the truth. The Watterson house is still there, still unsold. The damage has been repaired multiple times, but it always comes back. Water stains spreading from the inside out, like something is systematically trying to enter. I don't know what happened to those children, or why they're still there, or what they want. All I know is that at 11:43 every night, I wake up to the sound of running water, even though there's none to be found. And sometimes when it rains, I swear I can hear children's voices saying it's not deep enough over and over again. The worst part? I checked the local weather records after we left. That night at the lake house, it was exactly 32 years to the day since those children drowned. We hadn't even realized we were there on the anniversary. Story 10. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened last month. I've been going back and forth about posting this, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can explain what my dad and I encountered. I'm 14 and my dad and I love mushroom hunting after it rains. We live near Fernwood Valley, which is usually great for finding all kinds of fungi in the fall. Last month, we had a heavy rainfall that lasted 2 days, so we figured it would be perfect conditions. We got a late start that day because Dad had to finish some work stuff. It was already around 5 in the afternoon when we finally headed out. Usually we go earlier, but Dad promised it would just be a quick trip down to the river and back to check our usual spots. The days were getting shorter, but we had about an hour and a half before sunset, which seemed like enough time. The parking lot was nearly empty when we arrived. There were only 2 other cars, which wasn't surprising given the time. As we grabbed our bags and gear, I noticed an older woman and what looked like her grandkids getting into one of the cars. The other car was this beat-up red Honda that looked like it had been through hell. No one was around it. "Let's make this quick," Dad said, checking his phone. "We've got about an hour of good light left." We headed down the main trail that splits after about half a mile. Left goes to the parking lot exit, right goes toward the river. We've been here dozens of times, so we know all the shortcuts. Dad suggested we take this side path that cuts through the woods and comes out in this big open field where we've found oyster mushrooms before. Looking back, I wish we'd just stuck to the main trail. We took the shortcut and spent maybe 20 minutes in the field, but didn't find much. The light was starting to fade faster than we expected, so Dad suggested we head back. But somehow we took a wrong turn. Instead of coming back out onto the main trail where we expected, we ended up on the other side of the field. "This isn't right," Dad muttered, looking around. I could tell he was getting a bit anxious about the time. The sun was already dipping below the tree line, casting these long shadows across the field. "Let's just cut through here and get back to the main trail." We trudged through the tall grass toward where we thought the main trail should be. I started feeling uneasy, not because I was scared of the dark, but because the whole atmosphere had changed. The birds had gone quiet. There was this stillness in the air that made the hair on my arms stand up. As we finally reached the edge of the field, I realized the woman and her grandkids were probably the last visitors to leave. We were alone out here. We found a small path that looked like it would connect to the main trail. It was getting harder to see clearly as the light continued to fade. Dad took out his phone to use as a flashlight. That's when we saw him. A man emerged from a side path about 30 feet ahead of us. He had a small dog on a leash, some kind of terrier, I think. He just appeared. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt wrong immediately. He stopped and stared at us, not moving except for his hands, which he was waving in this slow, weird pattern. Not like a normal greeting wave, more like he was moving them through molasses, fingers spread wide, making these strange circular motions. Dad gave him a small, cautious wave back. "Slow down," he whispered to me. "Let's not pass him at the same time." We deliberately slowed our pace to a crawl. For a full minute we practically shuffled along while the man just stood there, still doing those creepy hand movements. His dog was alert, standing stiffly at his side, which seemed odd. Most dogs we meet on trails are either excited or at least curious. Finally, the man turned and walked toward the main trail. Dad and I exchanged looks. "That was weird," I whispered. "Yeah," Dad agreed. "Let's give him some space." We waited another minute before continuing toward the main trail. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. There was something so off about that encounter that I couldn't shake the feeling of dread building inside me. When we reached the intersection with the main trail, my stomach dropped. The man was standing there, completely motionless, staring in our direction. To our left was the path back to the parking lot. To our right, the kilometer-long trail to the river. But the man wasn't moving. He was just waiting. His dog sat beside him, unnaturally still as well. In the fading light, I could make out more details about him. He had greasy, shoulder-length hair, tiny round glasses that reflected what little light remained, a blue windbreaker jacket, and plaid shorts that seemed too thin for the cooling evening air. He looked to be around 50, but something about his face made it hard to tell exactly. Dad stopped a few feet away from him. "Hey there, you okay?" he asked in a friendly tone. Nothing, no response. The man just kept staring, not blinking, not moving, except for his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't right. Normal people don't act like this. Dad cleared his throat. "Well, have a good evening," he said, and we turned right toward the river path just to avoid walking past this guy to get to our car. We walked quickly for about a block down the river trail. Dad slowed a bit, then discreetly took out his phone, opened the camera app, and switched to the front-facing camera. He held it up like he was checking something or taking a selfie, but I knew he was using it to look behind us. "He's still there," Dad whispered. "Hasn't moved except to turn his body to keep watching us." I resisted the urge to look back. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. "We're going to circle back to the parking lot using the loop trail," Dad said calmly, but I could hear the tension in his voice. "Stay close to me." We picked up our pace, no longer interested in mushroom hunting. All I could think about was that man's expressionless face, the way he didn't respond when spoken to, those tiny glasses reflecting the dying light, and those bizarre zombie-like hand gestures. About a quarter mile down the trail, there's a smaller path that loops back toward the parking lot. We took it without hesitation. Dad kept checking behind us using his phone camera. "I don't see him," he said after a few minutes. "But let's keep moving." The loop trail was narrower and less maintained than the main trail. Branches scraped against my jacket as we hurried along. The sun had almost completely set now, and shadows seemed to move and shift around us. Every snapping twig made me jump. We were about halfway back to the parking lot when Dad suddenly grabbed my arm, stopping me in my tracks. He put a finger to his lips, then pointed ahead. Through the trees, maybe 50 feet ahead of us on the trail, was a figure standing perfectly still. Even in the growing darkness, I recognized the blue windbreaker. "How did he—" I started to whisper, but Dad squeezed my arm, silencing me. The man shouldn't have been able to get ahead of us. The loop trail was a one-way path. There were no shortcuts or connecting trails that would allow someone to cut ahead, unless he ran through the dense underbrush, which seemed impossible given how undisturbed the forest looked. Dad pulled me off the trail behind a large oak tree. We crouched down, trying to control our breathing. "We're going to cut through the woods," Dad whispered. "Stay right behind me. Step where I step." We moved as quietly as possible, parallel to the trail but hidden among the trees. Every few seconds, Dad would stop and look toward the trail to check if the man had moved. He was still there, his dog sitting obediently beside him. The forest floor was damp from the recent rain, allowing us to move more quietly than we would have on dry leaves. Still, I was terrified that at any moment the man would suddenly appear in front of us again. After what felt like forever, we could see the parking lot through the trees. Our car was the only one left. The red Honda was gone. "That's weird," I whispered. "Wasn't that his car?" Dad didn't answer. He was scanning the tree line, making sure the path to our car was clear. "Okay," he finally said. "We're going to run straight to the car. I'll unlock it as we approach. You get in first, then I'll get in and lock the doors immediately. Ready?" I nodded, my heart hammering in my chest. "Go!" We burst from the tree line and sprinted across the parking lot. Dad had the keys ready and hit the unlock button when we were about 20 feet away. I yanked open the passenger door and practically dove inside. Dad was right behind me, slamming his door shut and immediately locking all the doors with the center button. We sat there for a moment, breathing hard, looking out at the now dark forest edge. "Do you see him?" I asked, scanning the tree line. Dad started the car and turned on the headlights, illuminating the entrance to the trail. Nothing. He put the car in reverse, backing out of the parking space while continuing to look around. As we turned to leave, the headlights swept across the entrance sign to Fernwood Valley. Standing beside it was the man with his dog. He wasn't doing anything threatening, just standing there watching us leave. But as our headlights illuminated him, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. His eyes reflected the light like an animal's would, two perfect circles of yellow-green light shining back at us. Dad floored it. We sped out of that parking lot so fast I was thrown back against my seat. The entire drive home we kept checking the rearview mirror. Dad took a convoluted route, making random turns to make sure we weren't being followed. When we finally got home, we sat in the driveway for a long time, trying to process what had happened. "That wasn't normal," I finally said. Dad nodded. "No, it wasn't." We've spent the last month trying to come up with explanations. Maybe he was on drugs, maybe he had some kind of mental illness, maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for everything we experienced. But I can't shake the memory of those reflective eyes, or how he seemed to appear on trails ahead of us that he couldn't possibly have reached, or how his red Honda disappeared from the parking lot when he was clearly still in the forest. We haven't been back to Fernwood Valley since. I don't think we ever will. And every time I see someone in a blue windbreaker or with small round glasses, my heart races, and I have to remind myself that I'm safe. At least I think I am. Story 11. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened last winter. I've been driving trucks for almost 15 years, and you develop a sense for danger in this job. But nothing prepared me for that night in December 2019. I was hauling a load of industrial parts from central Brazil back north. The weather had been getting worse all day, started as light snow in the morning, but by afternoon, the radio was blasting warnings about high winds and temperatures dropping below freezing. After 11 hours on the road, I was still about 4 hours from my destination, but I wasn't about to risk it. Better alive than on time, that's always been my rule. Rest Stop 16 was the only decent place to pull over for the next 100 miles. It's one of those bare-bones stops. Just a paved lot with some dim lights, a couple porta potties, and a small covered area with vending machines. When I pulled in around 8:30, there was only one other truck there, an old Peterbilt parked way at the far end. I positioned my rig facing the road, force of habit, and locked everything down for the night. The wind was howling something fierce outside, rocking my cab every few minutes. I heated up a can of beef stew on my little propane stove and tuned into some old AM station playing classic country. Not a bad way to spend the evening, all things considered. I texted my wife to let her know I was safe and where I'd stopped. She sent back a picture of our daughter at her basketball game. Mia had just turned 16 last month. That detail becomes important later. It must have been around 11 when I heard it, a pounding on my driver's side door. Not just a knock, but frantic, desperate pounding. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Nobody should be out in this weather, and truckers know better than to bother each other unless it's an emergency. I pulled back the privacy curtain just enough to see outside. There was a girl standing there, couldn't have been more than 16 or 17. Her hair was plastered to her face, wet from snow, wearing what looked like a thin jacket completely inadequate for the weather. She was looking right at me with these wide eyes. "Please let me in," she shouted through the howling wind. "Someone's chasing me. Please help me." My heart dropped into my stomach. As a father with a daughter almost exactly her age, every instinct told me to help her. But 15 years on the road teaches you caution. Something felt off. Her voice sounded terrified, but her eyes, they weren't scanning the darkness behind her like someone being pursued. They were fixed on me, unblinking. I've got a dashboard camera that records both inside and outside the cab. Without making it obvious, I reached over and hit the record button. Better safe than sorry. "Who's chasing you?" I called through the glass. "Please," she cried, pounding again. "They're coming. Let me in." I checked all my mirrors, driver side, passenger side, the wide-angle ones that show the blind spots. There was nobody behind her, no footprints leading to my truck except hers, no other cars in the lot besides that distant Peterbilt. The snow was coming down heavy now, but under the lot lights, I should have been able to see anyone approaching. "Hold on," I said, still not opening the door. "Step back a bit so I can see you better." That's when it happened. The thing that still makes my skin crawl. She stopped crying. Just like that. Her face went completely blank for a second. Then, without another word, she turned and walked. Not ran, but walked. Calmly away from my truck and into the darkness beyond the lot lights. Not running, not looking behind her, just walking steadily into a blizzard like she was taking a casual stroll. I sat there frozen, hand still on the door lock. Every alarm bell in my head was ringing. I immediately checked all my mirrors again, turned on every external light my rig had. Nothing, just swirling snow and darkness. I double-checked that all my doors were locked, windows secure. Then I called the emergency number for the highway patrol. The dispatcher took my information but said the nearest officer was at least 40 minutes away due to the weather. They'd send someone when possible. There was no way I was sleeping now. I kept the engine running all night for heat, checking my mirrors every few minutes. The other truck at the far end of the lot never showed any signs of life. I tried flashing my lights at it a couple times, but no response. Around 3 in the morning, I thought I saw movement near the edge of the lot, but it could have been snow blowing around the light poles. When dawn finally broke around 7, the storm had passed. The lot was covered in about 8 inches of fresh powder. The other truck was gone, must have left while I was watching my mirrors. I hadn't even heard it start up. My hands were shaking as I pulled up the camera footage. What I saw made my blood run cold. The girl hadn't run up to my truck like I remembered. The footage showed her walking slowly, deliberately toward my cab from the direction of the woods beyond the lot. No panic in her movements until she got close enough for me to see her through the window. That's when the pounding and pleading started, but that wasn't the worst part. As I rewound and watched again, I noticed something moving under my trailer. The camera angle barely caught it. Something or someone crawling across the ice, staying in the shadow of my trailer, moving toward the front axle. While I was focused on the girl, this person had positioned themselves underneath my cab, waiting. I nearly vomited right there. If I had opened that door... I took the footage straight to the police station in the next town. The officer who reviewed it recognized the tactic immediately. He told me they'd received similar reports during colder months. A decoy would get the driver's attention at the door, while another person attacked from behind or below. They'd had 3 similar incidents, reported that winter alone. The video made its rounds on truckers' forums and group chats. Turned out a couple other drivers had experienced something similar at different rest stops along the same stretch of highway. One guy had actually opened his door, ended up with a concussion and his wallet stolen. He was lucky that's all they took. Since that night, I've installed motion sensors underneath my truck that connect to an alarm in my cab. I've got an infrared external camera now too. I never stop anywhere that doesn't have security cameras or other drivers visible, and I'd rather drive 11 hours straight than sleep with both eyes closed at one of those isolated rest stops. I still think about that girl sometimes. Was she being forced to help? Was she part of it willingly? I'll never know. But when I look at pictures of my own daughter, I can't help but wonder what circumstances could lead someone so young to be out in a blizzard, trying to lure truckers to open their doors. Every time I pass Rest Stop 16, I keep driving, no matter how tired I am, no matter the weather. Some places just aren't worth stopping at. The highway patrol told me they never found anyone matching the girl's description. The officer suggested she might have been a runaway or homeless person working with others to rob drivers. But something about the way she walked away into that storm, it just didn't seem right. People don't walk into blizzards. They just don't. Sometimes I still wake up hearing that pounding on my door, and I wonder what would have happened if I'd opened it. I wonder if I'd still be here to tell this story. Story 12. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what happened to me 3 weeks ago. I've barely slept since then. I keep checking the news, looking for any explanation, but there's nothing that makes sense. I need to write this down before I start questioning my own sanity. I had just accepted a promotion at work that would move me back to Chicago after living in Seattle for the past 6 years. It wasn't an easy decision. I'd built a life in Seattle, but the opportunity to be near my aging parents again was too good to pass up. Plus, the salary bump meant I could finally pay off my student loans. Instead of flying, I decided to drive cross-country. My Honda had about 140,000 miles on it, but it was reliable, and I figured a road trip would give me time to process the big change ahead. I packed up my apartment, loaded the essentials in my car, and hit the road on a Monday morning. The first day went smoothly. I drove through Washington and into Idaho, stayed at a Holiday Inn Express just past Coeur d'Alene, and got an early start the next day. That second day is when everything went to hell. I was making good time through Montana when the weather started turning. It was around 4 in the afternoon and the sky went from clear blue to dark gray in what felt like minutes. The rain started as a drizzle but quickly became a downpour. My windshield wipers could barely keep up, and visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet ahead. I slowed down to about 40 miles per hour, white-knuckling the steering wheel. Semi-trucks were passing me, throwing up sheets of water that completely blinded me for seconds at a time. It was getting dangerous, and I started looking for an exit to wait out the storm. That's when I saw it, a small blue sign illuminated by my headlights. Pine Ridge Lodge, next exit. I remember feeling relieved. I'd been going for hours without seeing any decent places to stop. I took the exit and followed a narrow, winding road that seemed to go on forever. The trees pressed in from both sides, creating a tunnel effect that made me feel claustrophobic. After about 3 miles, I checked my odometer. I finally saw lights ahead. The Pine Ridge Lodge looked like something from another era, a large 2-story wooden building with a wide porch and dim yellow lights in the windows. The parking lot was almost empty. Just 2 other vehicles, a dusty blue pickup truck and an older model Buick. I parked near the entrance, grabbed my overnight bag, and made a dash through the rain to the front door. The lobby was warm and smelled like pine and old wood. It reminded me of my grandfather's cabin in Wisconsin. That same musty, comforting smell of a place that had stood for decades. A man who had to be in his 70s stood behind the reception desk. He had thick white hair and glasses that magnified his eyes. He smiled when I approached. "Nasty night to be traveling," he said. His voice was raspy, like he'd been a heavy smoker. "Yeah, the storm came out of nowhere," I replied, shaking water from my jacket. "Do you have any rooms available?" "Always room at Pine Ridge," he said, pulling out a large leather-bound book instead of turning to a computer. He opened it and ran his finger down a page. "Just need your name and vehicle information." I thought it was weird he wasn't using a computer system, but figured this place was just old school. I told him my name, Michael Fletcher, and gave him my license plate number. As he wrote in the ledger with slow, deliberate strokes, I mentioned how glad I was to find the exit off the interstate in such bad weather. The old man looked up at me, his magnified eyes blinking slowly. Interstate? The interstate runs about 20 miles north of here, son. Has for years. I laughed, thinking he was joking. No, I just got off it maybe 10 minutes ago. Exit 217, I think. He stared at me for an uncomfortable moment, then shook his head. You must be turned around. Happens in storms like this. Here's your key. Room 8, top of the stairs, end of the hall on the right. I decided not to argue. The key he handed me was an actual metal key attached to a wooden tag with the number 8 burned into it. Not a key card like every other hotel I'd stayed at in the past decade. As I turned toward the stairs, I noticed a woman standing by a payphone in the corner of the lobby. She was maybe in her 30s, with shoulder-length brown hair, wearing jeans and a red sweater. She looked upset, repeatedly pushing the receiver button and dialing. I could hear her mutter, come on," under her breath. I headed up the creaky wooden stairs to find my room. The hallway was dimly lit with wall sconces that cast long shadows. Room 8 was at the very end, just like the old man had said. The room itself was basic but clean. A double bed with a dark green quilt, wooden nightstand, small desk with a lamp, and a bathroom with fixtures that looked like they were from the 70s. There was no TV, no phone, and of course no Wi-Fi. I checked my cell phone, no signal, not even one bar. I wasn't surprised. We were in the middle of nowhere, Montana during a storm. After I settled in, my stomach reminded me I hadn't eaten since a fast food lunch 6 hours earlier. I decided to check out the dining room the old man had mentioned was on the first floor. On my way down the hall, I passed room 3, where the door was slightly ajar. I glimpsed the woman from the lobby sitting on the edge of her bed, head in her hands. As I passed by, I heard her whisper something that made my skin crawl. They won't let us leave. I paused, unsure if I should check if she was okay, but something held me back. Maybe it was none of my business, or maybe it was the cold dread that had suddenly settled in my stomach. The dining room was nearly empty. Just a middle-aged couple sitting silently at a table near the window, not looking at each other, and a large man with a trucker's cap at a table by himself. The room had about 15 tables total, all empty except those 2. A young woman approached to take my order. She looked barely 20, with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her hands trembled as she held her notepad. The menu was limited: meatloaf, chicken and dumplings, or beef stew. I ordered the stew. While waiting for my food, I tried to make conversation with the server when she brought my water. Quiet night, huh? I guess the storm's keeping people away. Her eyes darted around nervously. We don't get many visitors anymore. The old man at the desk seemed confused about the interstate. He thought it was 20 miles north of here, but I just came from it. The server froze. She leaned in close and whispered, "There's no exit to this place. Not anymore." Then she straightened up quickly as if afraid someone had heard her and hurried away to the kitchen. My appetite vanished, but when she brought the stew, I forced myself to eat some of it. It tasted fine, but sat heavy in my stomach. The middle-aged couple never spoke during their meal. The trucker stared into his coffee cup like it held the secrets of the universe. Back in my room, I tried again to get a signal on my phone. Nothing. I even tried holding it up to the window. The storm was still raging outside, lightning occasionally illuminating the parking lot below. Both vehicles I'd seen earlier were still there. I tried to rationalize the weird vibes I was getting. It was just an old, outdated lodge. The employees were probably eccentric locals. The storm was making everyone on edge. I'd leave first thing in the morning and laugh about it later. I must have fallen asleep despite my unease, because I woke suddenly to the sound of knocking. Not on my door. It seemed to be coming from down the hall. I checked my watch, 2:17 in the morning. Then there was a soft knock on my own door. My heart nearly stopped. I lay perfectly still, not even breathing. A few seconds later, I heard something sliding under my door. After waiting what felt like an eternity, I got up and found a folded piece of paper on the floor. In shaky handwriting it read, "They take one each night. We need to leave now." My hands were trembling as I debated what to do. Part of me wanted to barricade the door and wait until morning, but curiosity and fear pushed me to investigate. I opened my door slowly and peered into the hallway. It was empty and silent. I stepped out, still in my t-shirt and jeans from the day before. I walked down the hall to room 3, where I'd seen the woman earlier. Her door was wide open now. The room was empty, not just empty of people. The bed was perfectly made, as if no one had used it. There was no luggage, no personal items, nothing to indicate anyone had been staying there. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I checked the other rooms on my way back to the stairs. All empty, all beds made, no sign of guests. The lobby was deserted. The old man wasn't at the desk. The leather-bound ledger was still there, though. I flipped it open and found the page where he'd written my information. My entry was there, but above it were only 2 other names from the past week: Margaret Harlow and Daniel Truitt. Behind the reception desk, I found a door marked "Staff Only." It was unlocked. Inside was a small office with filing cabinets and a desk. On the desk was a calendar showing October 1987. I backed out of the office, my mind racing. On the wall behind the reception desk, I noticed a framed newspaper article I hadn't seen before. The headline read, "Pine Ridge Lodge Celebrates 30 Years. The date on the newspaper was June 12, 1987. At that point, I just wanted out. I spotted a door at the back of the lobby marked "Exit." I pushed through it and found myself in a service corridor that led to the back of the building. Another door at the end opened to the parking lot. The rain had stopped, but the night was still pitch black. I ran to my car, which was now the only vehicle in the lot. The blue pickup and the Buick were gone. As I backed out, my headlights swept across the front of the lodge, illuminating the sign above the entrance that I hadn't been able to see clearly when I arrived. Pine Ridge Memorial Lodge, Esther 1954-1987. The drive back to the main road seemed longer than I remembered. The winding road through the trees kept going and going. When I finally reached what should have been the interstate, I instead found an old, abandoned stretch of highway, cracked asphalt with weeds growing through it. No cars, no lights, no signs of the busy interstate I'd been on just hours before. My GPS, which hadn't worked at the lodge, suddenly chimed back to life. According to it, I was on something labeled Proposed Interstate Development, a project that, when I zoomed out, showed as cancelled in 1987. I drove for almost an hour before finding a small town with a 24-hour gas station. The attendant, a middle-aged man with a mustache, looked surprised to see anyone at that hour. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said as I paid for coffee with shaking hands. "I stayed at a place called Pine Ridge Lodge," I told him. "Do you know it?" His face went pale. "Pine Ridge? That place burned down in '87. Killed everyone inside. It's just a charred foundation in the woods now." I felt like I was going to pass out. "That's impossible. I was just there. I slept there." He looked at me like I was crazy or playing a sick joke. "Look, man, I grew up here. That place has been gone for over 30 years. They never rebuilt after the fire." As I stumbled back to my car, my phone buzzed with a news alert. It was from the Montana Daily Chronicle, dated the next day. The headline, "Remains Finally Recovered from 1987 Pine Ridge Lodge Fire." The article stated that recovery workers had finally identified 3 victims whose remains had never been found after the infamous fire: Margaret Harlow, Daniel Truitt, and a long-haul trucker whose ID had melted but whose cap was still recognizable. The same 3 people I'd seen in the dining room the night before. I've been driving non-stop since then. I made it to Chicago, but I can't shake what happened. I keep checking the news, looking for my name to appear in a follow-up article about newly discovered remains. Every time my phone rings, I'm afraid it's someone calling to tell me I never made it out of Montana. I don't know what happened at Pine Ridge Lodge that night. I don't know if I was somehow transported back in time, or if those people were ghosts, or if I'm losing my mind. All I know is that I checked into a lodge that burned down 35 years ago and somehow lived to tell about it. Story 13. I still get nervous telling this story, even after more than a decade. Some nights I wake up sweating, thinking about what could have happened to me and my family if things had gone differently. It was October 2011. I'd been with the Crestwood PD for about 3 years by then. Our department was housed in this old Victorian mansion that the town had converted back in the 80s. Beautiful building from the outside, but inside it was a maze of cramped offices, narrow hallways, and strange little rooms that made no architectural sense. The basement was primarily used for evidence storage and old case files. That particular day, I was sent down to retrieve some evidence for a DUI case going to court the next morning. Nothing special, just routine. The basement always gave me the creeps, though. Poor lighting, that musty smell, and temperature that seemed about 10 degrees colder than the rest of the building. I found the breathalyzer results where they should have been, but as I was leaving, I noticed something odd about the far wall. There was a metal filing cabinet that seemed slightly out of place, like it had been moved recently. I'm not sure what made me look behind it. Curiosity, I guess, but I pushed it aside a few inches. That's when I saw it. A door. Not even a proper door, really, more like a crude opening with a heavy-duty padlock securing it. The door wasn't on any building plans I'd ever seen, and I'd done building security checks plenty of times. I was standing there staring at it when Lieutenant Holloway's voice nearly made me jump out of my skin. "The hell are you doing, Merritt?" he asked. His voice had this edge I'd never heard before. I turned around, still holding the evidence bag. "Found this door, sir. Didn't know we had a room back here." Holloway's face changed. I've interviewed enough suspects to recognize when someone's putting on a mask. His expression went from surprise to something carefully controlled. "That's just storage for sensitive materials from before your time," he said, coming closer. "Nothing that concerns current cases. Did you open it?" "No, sir. It's locked." "Good." He put his hand on my shoulder, steering me away from the door. "Best to forget you saw this, Merritt. Department policy. Need to know basis only. You understand?" I nodded, but something felt very wrong. Why would evidence storage be hidden behind a filing cabinet? And why was Holloway so tense? "I need that evidence upstairs," he said, taking the bag from my hand. "I'll handle it. You head on home early today." That should have been my first warning. Holloway had never suggested anyone leave early in the 3 years I'd known him. The next day, word had somehow spread that I'd been poking around the basement. Ryan, one of the older officers who'd been with the department since the 90s, caught me in the break room. "Heard you found the old storage room," he said casually, but his eyes were watching me carefully. "Yeah, didn't know it was there," I replied, trying to gauge his reaction. Ryan glanced around to make sure we were alone. "Drop it, James, for your family's sake." He walked away before I could ask what the hell he meant by that. For my family's sake? I had a wife and a 4-year-old daughter. Was that a threat? Over the next week, things got increasingly strange. I'd walk into the briefing room and conversations would stop. Lieutenant Holloway started assigning me to patrol the outskirts of town, keeping me away from the station as much as possible. I was excluded from department meetings for the first time since joining. But the worst part was feeling watched. I'd catch glimpses of other officers observing me from across the parking lot or through windows. Chief Brennan, who'd always been friendly, now barely acknowledged me in the hallways. I couldn't let it go. Something was very wrong, and that hidden door was the key. So I started digging, carefully. First, I researched the department's history at the public library outside of Crestwood to avoid being seen. Our department had been established in the 50s, but most of the records were pretty mundane until I hit the 90s. Between 1992 and 1998, There were 7 unsolved disappearances in our jurisdiction, all young adults, ages 19 to 26. The disturbing pattern I found was that according to witness statements, most of the missing persons had last been seen being questioned by Crestwood police officers. But the official case files showed minimal investigation by our department, with cases quickly handed off to state police who had little to go on. The chief during that period was Douglas Verner, now in his 80s and living in a nursing home about 30 miles away. 2 of his senior officers still worked at our department, Lieutenant Holloway and Sergeant Phillips. They'd both been young officers under Verner. I knew I needed to see what was behind that door, but I had to be smart about it. I requested the overnight shift for the following Tuesday, knowing it would be the quietest night at the station. Only 2 other officers would be on duty, and they'd be out on patrol most of the night. Around 2 in the morning, when I was alone in the building except for the dispatcher upstairs, I went down to the basement with a pair of bolt cutters from my garage at home. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that there was probably just old evidence from long-closed cases. The lock broke with a loud snap that seemed to echo through the basement. I froze, listening for any reaction from upstairs, but heard nothing. Slowly, I pulled the door open. The smell hit me first, chemical preservatives and something underneath that made my stomach turn. I fumbled for a light switch and found one just inside the door. What I saw will haunt me until the day I die. It wasn't a storage room. It was a museum of horror, organized with bureaucratic precision. 7 metal evidence boxes were arranged on shelves along the wall, each labeled with a name and date. I recognized the names from my research, the missing persons. Beside each box was a thick folder. With shaking hands, I opened the first box. Inside were personal effects, a wallet, keys, a watch, college ID for Thomas Larson, reported missing in 1992. There was clothing folded neatly, a t-shirt with what looked like blood spatter, jeans with the knees worn through as if someone had been kneeling for a long time. The folder contained photographs of a young man, first in what appeared to be an interrogation room I didn't recognize, then progressively more disturbing images of the same man with visible injuries. The final photos showed what was unmistakably a dead body. There were handwritten notes detailing interrogation sessions, documenting questions, responses, and compliance methods. They were signed by 3 officers, including Holloway. The final entry noted disposal location as Mine Number 3. I moved to the next box, then the next. The pattern was the same, evidence of violent interrogations that resulted in death, all meticulously documented, all signed by officers I knew, men I'd worked alongside for years. I realized with growing horror what I'd stumbled upon. These weren't just unsolved disappearances. They were murders committed by Crestwood police officers. But why? I skimmed through the interrogation notes, looking for a motive. Phrases jumped out. Witnessed delivery at warehouse, identified vehicle, claims no knowledge of shipment contents. It became clear these people had witnessed something they shouldn't have, something involving police corruption. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone, but I had to document this. I photographed everything, the boxes, their contents, the folders, the signatures. I knew with sickening certainty that if I reported this internally, the evidence would disappear, and I might too. As I was photographing the final box, I heard the upstairs door open. Someone had entered the station. I quickly turned off the light, closed the door, and hid the broken padlock in my pocket. I barely made it up the stairs and into the main office when Officer Daniels walked in. "Thought you were out on patrol," he said, eyeing me suspiciously. "Just finished some paperwork," I managed to say. "Heading back out now?" I don't know if he believed me, but I didn't wait to find out. I left the station, drove to a 24-hour diner 20 miles away, and used their Wi-Fi to send everything I'd documented to a secure email account I'd created. Then I called the Pennsylvania State Police. I wasn't naive. I knew coming forward meant the end of my career, and possibly much worse. But I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent. The next 48 hours were a blur of statements, evidence collection, and fear. When state authorities raided our department the following day, the hidden room had been emptied. The boxes, the files, everything was gone. If I hadn't taken those photographs, there would have been nothing to prove what I'd seen. Several officers, including Holloway and Phillips, denied everything. They claimed I was mentally unstable, that I'd fabricated the photos, somehow. But the state investigators found something they hadn't been able to erase. Trace evidence in the hidden room that matched DNA samples from the missing persons' families. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Former Chief Douglas Werner, now suffering from late-stage cancer, provided a full confession from his nursing home bed. He described how the department had systematically eliminated young witnesses who had stumbled upon their involvement in a drug trafficking operation in the 90s. With Werner's testimony and my evidence, state authorities began excavating the abandoned mines outside town. They recovered remains from 5 of the 7 victims, conclusively linking Holloway, Phillips, and 3 other officers to the crimes. The aftermath has been both validation and hell. My family and I had to enter witness protection after threats were made against us. My law enforcement career is over. Every few months I have to testify in yet another proceeding related to the case. What haunts me most isn't just the horror of what those officers did. It's how close I came to being another box in that room. How easily an entire police department became a killing machine, protected by badges and the silence of a small town. I still don't know why they let me see that door. Maybe it was a test. Maybe someone wanted the truth to come out. Or maybe they just got sloppy after getting away with it for so long. What I do know is that 7 people died horrible deaths at the hands of men sworn to protect them, and for 15 years, nobody did a thing about it. Whenever I hear people talk about a few bad apples in policing, I think about that hidden room and how an entire department rotted from the inside out. I don't sleep much anymore, and I never ever go into basements. Story 14. Still get chills thinking about that summer when I was 15. It's been almost 8 years, but some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I can hear whispering in my room. I've never shared this story online before, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar. Back in high school, I had 3 close friends, Gustavo, Juan, and Marcelo. We were the weird kids who didn't quite fit in anywhere else. Gustavo was the rich kid with strict parents. Juan was the quiet bookworm. I was the awkward collector of random things. And then there was Marcelo. I'll get to him. That summer, Gustavo surprised us by inviting us to spend a week at his family's beach house. None of us even knew his family had a beach house, which was strange because Gustavo usually bragged about everything his family owned. It was on some small island off the coast that I'd never heard of before. He said they rarely used it, but his dad had decided we could all go for a week while he worked remotely. The journey there was tense from the start. Gustavo's dad, Mr. Oliveira, was a serious germaphobe who kept sanitizing his hands every 15 minutes and wouldn't let us touch anything in his expensive SUV. The ferry ride to the island was rough, with Marcelo getting seasick and puking all over the deck. I remember making a joke about it, and Marcelo giving me this look that made my skin crawl. We'd always had this weird friction between us. I never fully trusted him, but he was part of our group, so I put up with him. When we arrived at the island, it was like stepping into some alternate reality. The place was gorgeous, clear blue water, perfect sand, lush trees surrounding a small village. But what struck me as odd was how everyone seemed to know Gustavo. Shop owners, random people on the street, they'd wave and call out, "Hey Gustavo, good to see you again." But Gustavo had told us they rarely visited. When I asked him about it, he just shrugged and said, "My dad comes here for business sometimes." The beach house was stunning, not huge but nice. 2 bedrooms, we boys shared one with bunk beds while Mr. Oliveira took the master. A spacious living room, kitchen, and a yard that led straight to a private beach. The first day was normal. We swam, played video games, ate junk food. I remember falling asleep that night feeling lucky to be there. The weird stuff started on the second day. I couldn't find my favorite cap, a vintage baseball cap my grandfather had given me before he died. I always kept track of it. I was sure I'd brought it back from the beach and left it on my bunk. When I mentioned it to the guys, Gustavo suggested I might have left it at the beach. But I knew I hadn't. I'm obsessive about my stuff, especially that cap. The next morning, one of my collectible pens went missing. It was this limited edition fountain pen with blue ink that I'd saved up for months to buy. Again, I was positive I'd put it in my backpack's side pocket where I always kept it. The other guys just rolled their eyes when I brought it up. They were used to me being particular about my things. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of whispering. Not like normal talking in your sleep mumbling, but deliberate, rhythmic whispering. I couldn't make out any words, but it sounded almost like chanting. I lay perfectly still, terrified to move or show I was awake. The sound seemed to be coming from Marcelo's bunk across the room. After what felt like forever, the whispering stopped. I stayed frozen until morning, pretending to be asleep when everyone else woke up. At breakfast, I couldn't look Marcelo in the eye. He seemed normal, joking around with João and Gustavo like nothing had happened. Later that day, we were playing catch in the yard when Marcelo said he needed to use the bathroom. No big deal, right? But about 5 minutes later, I glanced up at the house and saw him. He was staring down at us from a second-floor window. The thing is, there was no second floor. Bathroom. The only bathroom on the upper level was in Mr. Oliveira's master bedroom, which was strictly off-limits to us. I blinked, and Marcelo was gone. I looked back at João and Gustavo, confused, and before I could say anything, Marcelo walked out the front door downstairs, rejoining us like nothing happened. It was impossible. He couldn't have gotten from that upstairs window to the front door so quickly, unless there was someone else in the house who looked like Marcelo. The thought made my stomach turn. That evening, I told the guys I wasn't feeling well, not entirely a lie, since my nerves were shot. Mr. Oliveira was taking them to a restaurant in the village, but agreed I could stay behind to rest. As soon as they left, I knew what I had to do. I waited 15 minutes to make sure they wouldn't come back for anything. Then I went to Marcelo's bunk. His backpack was tucked underneath, and with shaking hands I unzipped it. What I found inside made me physically sick. My cap was there, stuffed at the bottom. So was a pair of my underwear that I hadn't even noticed was missing, my spare toothbrush, a bracelet I'd thought I'd lost months ago, but that wasn't the worst part. There was a notebook, one of those black and white composition books. I opened it and immediately wished I hadn't. The pages were filled with pencil drawings, not normal doodles, but detailed, grotesque images. Monsters with too many limbs, people being run over by cars, stabbed, mutilated, torture scenes with meticulous attention to detail. Some pages had weird symbols that looked like something from a horror movie about demons. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the notebook. I kept flipping through, unable to stop despite my growing horror. Near the back I found drawings of me, sleeping in my bunk, standing on the beach, and then one that showed me crucified with my legs missing, blood pouring from the stumps. The last page had my name written in large block letters. Underneath were 4 words: I will do it tomorrow. I don't remember screaming, but I must have, because suddenly Mr. Oliveira was there. They hadn't gone to the restaurant after all. He'd forgotten his wallet. He found me holding the notebook, hyperventilating. When I showed him what I'd found, all the color drained from his face. Put everything back exactly where you found it, he said quietly. Don't say a word to Marcelo. We're leaving tonight. He called the boys back to the house, claiming there was a family emergency and we needed to return immediately. I stuffed everything back into Marcelo's bag, my hands trembling so badly I could barely zip it up. When they returned, I couldn't look at Marcelo. I could feel his eyes burning into the back of my head as we packed, but I was too terrified to turn around. The ride back was silent and tense. Mr. Oliveira kept looking in the rearview mirror, not at the road behind us, but at Marcelo. When we got back to the mainland, he dropped everyone off at their homes. Before I got out, he gripped my arm and whispered, "Don't tell your parents. I've already spoken with Marcelo's family. They'll handle it." The minute I walked through my front door, I broke down. I told my parents everything, showing them a page I'd torn from the notebook when Mr. Oliveira wasn't looking. My dad called the police immediately. They got a warrant and found the notebook, exactly as I'd described. They returned my stolen items, except for the pen, which was nowhere to be found. Marcelo's family moved away that week. He never came back to school. The police questioned me for hours, but I had no answers for them. Why had he been collecting my things? What did those drawings mean? What was he planning to do to me? For months after, I had nightmares about Marcelo staring at me through windows that shouldn't exist. I'd wake up convinced I could hear whispering in my room. My parents took me to therapy, which helped some, but not completely. I graduated high school 2 years ago and moved to another city for college. I thought I'd put it all behind me. Then, last month, I received a letter at my apartment, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence, "I remember everything." Wrapped inside the paper was my missing pen. I haven't slept properly since. I've moved apartments and changed my phone number. I don't know how he found my address. I don't know what he wants. But I know he's out there, somewhere, thinking about me, drawing me, waiting. Sometimes I wonder if what I saw that day, Marcelo in 2 places at once, wasn't just my imagination. If maybe whatever was in that house, on that island, wasn't entirely human. Or maybe the most terrifying possibility is that he was just a disturbed kid who somehow fixated on me and is still out there, holding on to his obsession after all these years. I don't know which is worse. Story 15. I've been doing food delivery for nearly 8 months now to save up for my own place. Living with my parents at 25 isn't exactly the dream, but rent in Pineville is ridiculous, and my day job at the hardware store barely covers my car payment. The delivery gig was supposed to be simple: work evenings, make some extra cash, go home. Nothing complicated. Last Wednesday night changed everything. I'm still trying to make sense of it. I'd been on the road since 4 in the afternoon, and it was pushing 11 at night. I was about to call it quits, had made decent money that day, around $150, including tips. The app pinged with one last order as I was about to log off. Normally I'd ignore it that late, but the guaranteed tip caught my eye, $20 for a 15-minute drive. That's the kind of money that makes you think, just one more delivery. The restaurant was this Thai place I deliver from all the time. The girl at the counter knows me by now and had everything ready. "Last one for the night?" she asked, and I nodded. If I'd known what was coming, I would have just gone home. The GPS directed me to a part of town I'd never been to before, which was weird because I've lived in Pineville my whole life. I thought I knew every street, but apparently not. The main road turned into a smaller road, which eventually became this well-maintained gravel path. My headlights bounced off trees lining both sides, and that's when I started feeling uneasy. Who orders food delivery to the middle of nowhere at 11 at night? After driving for what felt like forever but was probably only 5 minutes, I came to a gate. It was one of those wooden park entrance gates with a chain that can be lowered or raised. The chain was down, so I assumed it was okay to drive through. About 50 yards in, the road opened up to what looked like a small parking area, just a clearing with space for maybe 10 cars. Mine was the only one there. I checked the app again. The instructions just said, "We'll call with directions." Great. I was sitting in an empty parking lot in what seemed to be some kind of park or nature reserve at 11:15 at night, waiting for someone to call me about their pad thai. My phone rang almost immediately, like they'd been watching for my arrival. I answered, trying to sound professional. "Hello? "This is Marcus with your delivery." The voice that responded was deep and raspy, like the person had been smoking for decades. "Ah, excellent, you found the place." He sounded way too cheerful for someone calling at this hour. "Yeah, I'm at the parking area, where my friends and I are camping about a quarter-mile in. Just take the main trail from the parking lot and look for our campfire. You can't miss it." Something felt off, but I told myself I was just tired and wanted to go home. "All right, I'll head that way now." "Thanks, man. The $20 tip is all yours. We really appreciate this." I grabbed the food bag, locked my car, and used my phone as a flashlight to find the trailhead. There was a small information board with a map, but it was too dark to read properly. The trail was clear enough, though, a dirt path about 4 feet wide heading straight into the woods. I started walking, feeling more and more uncomfortable with each step. The forest was dense on both sides, and the only sounds were my footsteps and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. My phone's flashlight seemed pathetically weak against the darkness. After walking for about 5 minutes, I caught a glimpse of orange light flickering between the trees off to my right. That had to be the campfire. The weird thing was, it wasn't on the main trail, but set back in the woods, maybe 30 or 40 yards. I hesitated at first, not wanting to leave the trail, but I could see the fire clearly, and the $20 tip was keeping me motivated. I carefully picked my way through the underbrush, trying not to trip over roots or rocks. As I got closer to the fire, something felt very wrong. The fire was small, just a pile of burning sticks, really, and there was no camping equipment around it. No tents, no chairs, no coolers, nothing that would suggest anyone was actually camping there. I stopped about 15 feet from the fire, suddenly aware of how quiet it had gotten. Even the wind seemed to have died down. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding thin and weak in the darkness. "Food delivery?" That's when I heard it, a twig snapping somewhere behind me. I spun around, nearly dropping the food bag, and pointed my phone light toward the sound. There was someone standing between me and the trail, just watching me. The light only caught the lower half of their body at first. Dark pants, work boots. When I raised the light, I saw a tall man with dark hair and the most unsettling smile I've ever seen. It wasn't a normal smile. It was too wide, too forced, like someone who had seen smiles but didn't quite understand how they worked. "You found us," he said, and I immediately recognized the raspy voice from the phone. But there was no us, just him standing there, smiling that horrible smile. I dropped the food bag. I'm not proud of it, but survival instinct kicked in. "I need to go," I said, already backing away. He took a step toward me. "But you just got here. Why don't you stay a while? My friends will be back soon." He gestured vaguely toward the darkness behind me. I turned and ran, not toward the trail because he was blocking that path, but in another direction I hoped would eventually connect with the main trail. I could hear him calling after me. "Hey, don't go, we just want to talk." His voice had changed, trying to sound friendly but coming across as desperate and angry. I ran harder than I've ever run in my life, branches whipping against my face and arms. I had no idea where I was going, just away from him. By some miracle, I stumbled onto what felt like a path. It was narrower than the main trail, but headed in roughly the right direction, so I followed it. Behind me, I could hear movement in the woods. Not just one person, but what sounded like multiple sets of footsteps crashing through the underbrush. His friends must have been hiding nearby the whole time. The path eventually led back to the main trail, and I sprinted toward the parking lot, my lungs burning. When I finally broke through the trees and saw my car, I felt a moment of relief, until I noticed the gate. The chain that had been down when I drove in was now stretched across the exit, blocking my way out. Someone had raised it while I was in the woods. I fumbled with my keys, dropping them once before managing to unlock the car and jump inside. I locked the doors immediately and started the engine, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. In my rearview mirror, I saw movement at the edge of the parking lot. 3 figures emerged from the trees. The man with the raspy voice was in front, still wearing that unnatural smile. The other two stayed in the shadows, but I could see they were tall and dressed in dark clothing. I didn't hesitate. I threw the car into drive and gunned it toward the gate. There was maybe a 2-foot gap between the gatepost and where the chain was secured. It was going to be tight, but I had no choice. I aimed for the gap and accelerated, feeling my car scrape against the wooden post as I squeezed through. The side mirror snapped off, and I'm pretty sure I left some paint behind, but I made it through and kept going, gravel flying as I sped down the access road. I didn't slow down until I hit the main road, and even then I kept checking my mirrors until I was back in familiar territory. I went straight home, parked in my parents' driveway, and sat there shaking for a good 20 minutes before I could bring myself to go inside. The next morning, I convinced myself I'd overreacted. Maybe they really were just campers. Maybe the chain across the gate was a coincidence. I decided to drive by the entrance to the park in daylight just to ease my mind. What I found made my blood run cold. There was a sign at the entrance I hadn't noticed in the dark. Pine Ridge Nature Reserve, open daily, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., no camping, no fires. I reported what happened to the police, but they didn't seem particularly concerned. They said they'd look into it, but I could tell they thought I was either exaggerating or had wandered onto private property by mistake. I quit the delivery job that same day. No amount of money is worth what nearly happened to me in those woods. I still don't know who those people were or what they wanted, but I'm certain of one thing. That order wasn't about food. It was a trap, and I was the prey. Every time my phone rings now, especially at night, I feel my heart rate spike. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I'd stayed when he asked me to, if I'd waited for his friends to return. I've been sleeping with my bedroom door locked and a chair propped under the doorknob. My parents think I'm being paranoid, but they didn't see that smile. They didn't hear those footsteps in the woods. I check the delivery app sometimes, just out of curiosity. That address doesn't exist in their system anymore. No record of the order at all, like it never happened. But the scrape on my car where I squeezed through the gate is still there, a constant reminder that it was all too real. I don't know who needs to hear this, but be careful out there. Not everyone ordering food at 11 at night is just hungry. Some of them are hunting. Story 16. I still have trouble sleeping when April rolls around. Even after all these years, I find myself checking the windows, making sure the curtains are completely closed, no gaps for anyone to peek through. I was 16 when it happened back in 2002, and that Easter Sunday changed our town forever. I lived in Middlebrook my whole life, small Pennsylvania town where everybody knows everybody's business. My dad worked at WPenn, our local CBS station, as a production manager. Not exactly glamorous, but it was a decent job and he enjoyed it. That Easter Sunday started out totally normal. Mom was cooking a ham, my little sister Amber was running around the house looking for hidden eggs, and I was being a typical teenager, half watching TV while texting my friends. Dad had the day off, which was rare for him on holidays. Usually the station ran on a skeleton crew for Easter, playing mostly pre-recorded content and old movies. That afternoon, they were showing Easter Parade, that old musical with Judy Garland that my grandma loved. I wasn't really watching, just had it on in the background while waiting for dinner. It was around 3 in the afternoon when the TV started acting weird. At first, I thought it was just our reception. The screen got all staticky, and I was about to call for Dad when it went completely black. I remember feeling annoyed, thinking I'd have to get up and fiddle with the antenna, but before I could, the screen changed again. What came on next still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. The footage was grainy, like someone was filming with one of those old camcorders. It showed a dimly lit room with tables that had Easter decorations on them, lily flowers and colored eggs arranged in weird patterns. The camera work was shaky, like whoever was filming was walking around or maybe nervous. I called out to my dad, "Hey, what's happening with the TV?" thinking maybe it was some weird station problem. He came in from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel, looking confused. That's when we saw it. This figure entered the frame. I'll never forget it as long as I live. Someone wearing this horrifying rabbit mask, not like the cute Easter bunny costumes you see at the mall. This was different, crude, handmade, with these big black eyes that seemed to stare right through the screen. The way they moved was just wrong. It wasn't like a person in a costume. It was deliberate, swaying back and forth in this unnatural rhythm. Dad immediately tensed up. "That's not part of the programming," he said, reaching for the remote to change the channel. But he stopped, and we both just stared, frozen in place. The room was silent except for this low mechanical humming in the background and the sound of breathing. Heavy, irregular breathing that made my stomach twist. The rabbit figure just stood there, staring at the camera for what felt like forever but was probably less than a minute. Then it held up a sign. The handwriting was messy, almost childlike. "They are looking in all the wrong places." I remember getting goosebumps all over my arms. Dad was on the phone immediately, calling the station, but nobody was answering. What came next made my blood run cold. The footage switched to what looked like surveillance video of someone's backyard. There was a family having an Easter celebration, adults standing around talking, kids hunting for eggs. The camera zoomed in on a little girl in a yellow dress, following her as she skipped around the yard. Dad dropped the phone. "That's the Keller place," he whispered. "That's right now. Today." The Kellers lived just a few blocks away from us. Their daughter Emma was in my sister's class at school. The footage we were watching wasn't from some random home video. It was happening that very day, probably just hours earlier. The rabbit figure came back on screen, holding another sign. "I've been watching. Happy Easter, Middlebrook." And then, just like that, the screen flickered and Easter parade was back on as if nothing had happened. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Dad was on the phone again immediately, this time getting through to someone at the station. I could hear him explaining what we'd seen, his voice getting more urgent as he spoke. Mom came in from the kitchen, asking what was going on, and when Dad told her, she immediately went to check on Amber, pulling all the curtains closed as she went. Within an hour, our phone was ringing non-stop. Turns out, everyone watching CBS that afternoon had seen the same thing. The police showed up at our house to talk to Dad, since he worked at the station. They wanted to know if he had any idea how someone could interrupt a broadcast like that. "It's not like the old days," he kept telling them. "You can't just hijack a signal anymore. Whoever did this had to have access to our systems." That night, nobody in Middlebrook slept well. The local news ran a story about a disturbing broadcast interruption that was under investigation. They didn't show the footage, but they described it and asked anyone with information to come forward. The next day at school, it was all anyone could talk about. Emma Keller wasn't in class, and rumors were flying that her family had left town. I later found out they'd just gone to stay with relatives for a while, but the damage was done. Everyone was scared, especially when we realized what this meant. Someone had been watching the Kellers, filming their private Easter celebration without them knowing. 3 days after the broadcast, Dad came home looking pale and shaken. The station had received a package that morning containing a VHS tape. The police had been called immediately, but Dad had seen what was on it. "It's the full version," he told Mom in a hushed voice when they thought I wasn't listening. "Plus more, much more." I learned later that the tape showed extended footage of the rabbit-masked person arranging colored eggs around photographs. Photos of kids from town, kids we knew. There was also footage of them standing in front of this corkboard covered with maps of Middlebrook, newspaper clippings, and what looked like family schedules. At the end, the figure leaned in close to the camera and whispered, "Some secrets stay buried, others come back every spring." The next week, one of the technical guys from the station, Thomas Reichman, disappeared. Everyone immediately suspected him. He had access to the broadcasting equipment after all. But then the police found his wallet in the station parking lot with a note inside that said, "Not me. Look at the 1985 files." That's when things got even weirder. The station manager dug through their archives and found documentation of a similar incident that had happened on Easter Sunday in 1985, 17 years earlier. A brief signal interruption showing a figure in a rabbit mask. It had been dismissed as a prank at the time, but now it took on a much more sinister meaning. The police started looking into unsolved disappearances around Easter holidays dating back to 1985. They found 13 cases that might be connected. 13 people who had vanished without a trace, all around Easter time, all from areas surrounding Middlebrook. For months, we lived in fear. Parents wouldn't let their kids play outside alone. Everyone was suspicious of everyone else. Who among us could be the person behind the mask? It had to be someone local, someone who knew the town, knew the families. The investigation stalled. Without any solid evidence or suspects, there wasn't much the police could do. Life in Middlebrook slowly returned to a tense version of normal, but Easter was never the same. The following year, most families celebrated indoors with their curtains drawn. The annual town Easter egg hunt was cancelled indefinitely. I left for college in 2004 and tried to put it all behind me. I only came back to visit occasionally, and when I did, I could still feel the shadow of what had happened hanging over the town. In 2013, more than a decade after the broadcast, I got a call from my dad. A house near the old station building, W. Penn had relocated to a new facility in 2007, was being renovated, and the construction workers had found something, a hidden room, accessible only through a concealed panel in the basement. Inside was a rabbit mask matching the description from the broadcast and a list of names written on the inside of it. Thomas Reichman's name was there, along with 12 others, all corresponding to the unsolved disappearances. But the most chilling part was the last name on the list. It belonged to someone still living in Middlebrook, someone who had been visible in the footage from 2002, someone who might be the next target. I won't write the name here. The person in question has been under police protection on and off since the discovery, though there's never been any direct threat. The case remains unsolved. Despite extensive investigation, no one has ever been able to identify who was behind the mask or how they gained access to the station's broadcasting system. To this day, Middlebrook approaches Easter differently than other towns. Families deliberately change their celebration times each year, never announcing their plans publicly. Many still draw their curtains during gatherings. The local police increase patrols during the Easter season. As for me, I still check under my bed sometimes. I still make sure my windows are locked at night. And every Easter Sunday, I can't help but wonder if they're still out there, watching from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to return. Because whoever they are, they knew our town, knew our families, knew when and where we would be celebrating. And maybe they're still watching, their eyes following another little girl in a yellow dress, arranging their colored eggs around new photographs, whispering to themselves. Some secrets stay buried, others come back every spring. Story 17. I've never shared this before, but something happened 2 summers ago that still gives me chills when I think about it. I need to get this off my chest because I can't make sense of it, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. My dad used to take me camping at this hidden lake when I was a kid. It's not on any maps or hiking apps, just a small body of water tucked away in the mountains about 20 miles west of my hometown. The locals call it Collar Lake, named after some old settler family, but you won't find it marked anywhere. There's no official trail leading to it, just a worn path through dense forest that my dad showed me when I was 12. After my divorce finalized last June, I needed to clear my head. City life was suffocating me, and all I could think about was escaping somewhere quiet where my phone wouldn't work and nobody could find me. That's when I remembered Collar Lake. I hadn't been there in probably 8 years, but I figured it would be the perfect spot to decompress. I took Friday off work, packed my old camping gear into my Subaru, and left the city around noon. The drive was about 3 hours, followed by a hike that took another hour and a half. I almost missed the trailhead. It was more overgrown than I remembered. just a slight break in the tree line off this neglected county road. What I've always loved about this spot is how utterly secluded it is. In all the times I'd been there, I'd never once encountered another person. The lake itself isn't particularly special, maybe a quarter-mile across, surrounded by pines and a rocky shore, but that isolation made it perfect. I reached the lake around 4 in the afternoon. The summer heat was intense, but under the tree canopy it was bearable. I set up my tent in the same clearing my dad always chose, about 50 feet from the water's edge with a good view of the lake. I gathered firewood, filtered some water, and made a simple dinner as the sun began to set. That first night was exactly what I needed. Just me, the crackling fire, and the chorus of frogs and insects. The next morning I woke up feeling refreshed. I spent most of the day just decompressing, reading by the lake, taking a quick swim, and hiking part of the way around the shore. By mid-afternoon, I decided to walk the entire perimeter of the lake, something I'd done with my dad years ago. The lake isn't huge, so circling it only takes about 40 minutes if you're walking at a normal pace. I started my loop around 3 o'clock, heading clockwise from my campsite. The first half of the lake has a decent shore to walk along, but the back half gets rockier and forces you to climb over fallen trees and navigate through thicker vegetation. I was about 3/4 of the way around on the far side from my camp when I spotted them, a set of barefoot human footprints in the mud at the water's edge. I stopped dead in my tracks. The prints were clearly fresh. The edges were sharp, not weathered by rain or wind, and there was still water seeping into the deepest parts of them. What immediately unnerved me was that I had walked past this exact spot earlier that morning, and there had definitely been no footprints then. I'd been circling sections of the lake all day and hadn't seen or heard anyone. The prints were heading both toward and away from the water, as if someone had walked down to the lake and then back into the forest. I'm not typically paranoid, but something about those footprints sent a chill through me. They were definitely adult-sized, probably a man's from the size, and they had appeared within the last few hours without me noticing anyone. I scanned the tree line but saw nothing unusual, just the dense forest that surrounds the lake. I quickened my pace to finish my loop, constantly glancing over my shoulder. When I got back to camp, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe some local hiker had found the lake and gone for a quick swim while I was on the other side. Maybe they knew about some other trail I wasn't aware of. Still, something felt off about the whole situation. As the afternoon faded into evening, my unease grew stronger rather than weaker. I kept thinking I heard twigs snapping in the forest behind my campsite, but whenever I looked, there was nothing there. I built my fire larger than necessary, hoping the light would extend farther into the darkness. I heated up some soup for dinner, but my appetite had diminished. The sun had completely set by 7:30, and full darkness settled in by 8. I sat by the fire with my headlamp off, listening to the normal nighttime forest sounds and trying to distinguish them from any potential human movements. At around 9:15, I remember checking my watch. I heard it clearly, footsteps approaching from the trees behind me. Not animal footsteps, these were distinctly human, a deliberate gait that crunched on the pine needles and twigs. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest, and slowly turned toward the sound. 2 figures emerged from the darkness and stopped at the edge of my firelight. A man and a woman, both thin and dressed in what looked like ordinary hiking clothes, but something about them seemed off. They stood unnaturally still, just watching me. Their faces were partially shadowed, but I could tell they weren't smiling, and the man was barefoot, while the woman wore what looked like old leather boots. My voice caught in my throat, but I managed to call out, "Hey there, can I help you?" My words sounded strained even to my own ears. Neither of them responded. Then, without warning, the woman turned and sprinted back into the forest. Not walked, sprinted. 1 second she was there, the next she was crashing through the underbrush, moving faster than seemed normal on the uneven forest floor in near total darkness. The man remained standing there, completely motionless. His stillness was almost more disturbing than the woman's sudden departure. I noticed his feet. definitely bare and almost certainly the source of the footprints I'd found. "Are you okay?" I tried again, my hand instinctively moving toward my pocket knife. "Are you lost or something?" He didn't answer. He didn't even blink. He just stared at me with an expression I still can't properly describe. Not angry or threatening, but completely void of normal human emotion. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds, he too turned and walked back into the forest, not running like the woman, but with deliberate, measured steps until the darkness swallowed him. I sat frozen for several minutes, straining to hear any sounds of movement in the forest. My mind raced with possibilities. Were they just weird hikers? Locals who resented outsiders at their lake? Drug runners? None of the explanations I came up with felt right. I decided right then that I wasn't staying another night. Whatever was happening, I wanted no part of it. I quickly doused my fire and began packing my gear, using my headlamp to see. Every few seconds I would stop and listen, convinced I could hear movement in the trees around me. It took me about 20 minutes to break down my tent and pack everything. My original plan had been to hike out the next morning, but there was no way I was waiting until then. I knew hiking at night was risky, but staying felt riskier. I shouldered my pack, grabbed my flashlight, and started down the trail back toward my car. The path was difficult to follow in the dark, but I'd come this way enough times to generally know the route. The forest at night was a different world. Shadows stretched and morphed in the beam of my light, and every natural sound seemed amplified. I'd been hiking for maybe 10 minutes when I heard it, running footsteps somewhere off to my left, moving parallel to the trail. It wasn't an animal. The cadence was unmistakably human. I stopped and swung my light in that direction, but the beam only penetrated about 30 feet into the dense vegetation before darkness took over. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound authoritative rather than terrified. No response. I picked up my pace, practically jogging now despite the dangerous terrain. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment I thought maybe I'd imagined them. Then they started again, this time from my right side. They were soft, unnaturally soft for someone running through a forest at night, reinforcing my belief that whoever it was remained barefoot. This pattern continued for the entire hour-long hike back to my car. I would hear running, stop and listen, then the sounds would cease, only to resume from a different direction moments later. They never got closer, but they never fully went away either. It was as if they were observing me, tracking my movements but keeping their distance. The worst moment came when I briefly lost the trail. I had to backtrack about 50 yards, and as I turned around, my light caught something, a glimpse of movement between two trees about 40 yards away. I'm almost certain it was the woman, just standing there watching me, but when I focused my beam directly at the spot, there was nothing. I've never felt such relief as when I finally spotted my car through the trees. I practically ran the last 100 yards, fumbling with my keys as I approached. As I threw my pack in the back seat and jumped into the driver's seat, I heard one final set of running footsteps, much closer this time, rushing toward the road from the forest. I started the engine and peeled out onto the empty county road, not even bothering to buckle my seatbelt until I was several miles away. The entire drive home, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see those two figures somehow following me. I've never gone back to Collar Lake. I've never told anyone this story until now. Sometimes I wonder if I overreacted to some harmless strangers, but deep down, I know there was something profoundly wrong about that encounter. The way they moved, their silence, their watching. It wasn't normal human behavior. The thing that haunts me most is not knowing who they were or what they wanted. Sometimes I wonder if they were even people at all. I know how that sounds, but if you'd been there, felt what I felt, you'd understand why I still can't explain what happened that night. Story 18. I've waited 3 years to tell this story. I've moved twice, changed my name, and I still look over my shoulder every single day. But I need to get this out because I can't keep living with this weight on my chest. Back in September of 2019, I was working as a detective with the Maryland State Police. I'd been with the force for 9 years, made detective after 5, and I thought I knew how things worked. I was wrong about everything. It started with a package. Plain brown, no return address, just my name and the station address typed on a label. Inside was a USB drive wrapped in a sheet of paper with a red triangle drawn on it. No note, no explanation. I plugged it into my computer. Yeah, stupid move security-wise, but I was curious. What I found made my stomach drop. It contained dozens of video files from body cameras, not the official ones we used, but personal ones. The footage showed several high-ranking officers in our department and neighboring jurisdictions engaged in some seriously illegal shit, taking payoffs, planting evidence, even coordinating cover-ups for connected people. Each video file was marked with that same red triangle in the corner of the thumbnail. I recognized most of the faces. Captain Harris, Lieutenant Morrison, Sergeant Reeves from Narcotics, and Officer Rodriguez, who worked patrol in my district. These weren't random bad apples. These were respected officers with decades of combined experience. I spent that entire night going through the files, taking notes, trying to make sense of it all. By morning, I'd decided I needed to investigate quietly before taking it up the chain. With so many high-ranking officers involved, I didn't know who I could trust. I made copies of everything and hid them in different locations, one at my sister's house, one in my gym locker, and kept the original at home. Looking back, that was probably what saved my life. The first warning came less than 48 hours after I received the package. I walked out to my car in the station parking lot and found all 4 tires punctured, not slashed randomly, but with precise triangular patterns. 3 holes arranged in a perfect triangle on each tire. It could have been dismissed as vandalism, but I knew better. Someone was sending me a message. That night, I noticed an unmarked police cruiser parked across from my apartment. It was there for hours, just sitting with the engine running. When I took out my phone to take a picture, it immediately drove away. I barely slept. The next morning, I got a call about Officer Rodriguez. He'd been found dead in his patrol car, parked behind an abandoned warehouse on his route. No signs of struggle, no visible trauma. The preliminary report suggested a heart attack, which seemed plausible. He was overweight and in his 50s, but something felt off. I went to the scene and asked to see the dashcam footage. The tech guy pulled it up and we watched Rodriguez's last patrol. Everything seemed normal until 2:37 a.m. The video skipped ahead exactly 7 minutes, and when it resumed, Rodriguez was slumped over the wheel, already dead. 7 minutes missing, that's not a coincidence or a technical glitch. While we were reviewing the footage, something else happened. Rodriguez's radio, which had been silent, suddenly emitted a burst of static that made everyone jump. It lasted about 3 seconds, and then went silent again. The tech guy said, "What the hell was that?" But everyone else just shrugged it off as equipment malfunction. I took a copy of the audio and had a friend in the tech department enhance it. Buried in that static was a voice, barely audible, saying, "Red signal active." 3 words that would haunt me for months. 2 days later, Lieutenant Morrison was found dead in his car in his garage at home. Same scenario, no trauma, apparent heart attack, and his dash cam had the same 7-minute skip. I was now convinced these weren't coincidences. Something was happening, and it was connected to the footage I'd received. I spent the next few days digging deeper into both Rodriguez and Morrison. On the surface, they had nothing in common besides being cops. Different precincts, different backgrounds, different ranks. But then I found it, a photo from a department barbecue 3 years earlier. In the background, barely noticeable, was a small group of officers standing in a circle, each wearing a lapel pin with a tiny red triangle. I started looking for that pin in other department photos and found it again and again, always on the same group of officers. When I cross-referenced them with the officers in the body cam footage, there was a perfect match. Whatever this group was, it included everyone implicated in the corruption I'd discovered. I needed more information, so I reached out to a retired officer I trusted, Sam Whitaker. We met at a diner 30 miles outside of town. When I showed him the photo and pointed out the pins, his face went pale. "You need to drop this, Lauren," he said. voice barely above a whisper. "You're looking at the Brotherhood of the Shield." Sam explained that the Brotherhood was an unofficial group within law enforcement that had existed for decades. They operated as a parallel justice system, taking care of problems that couldn't be solved through official channels. But over time, they'd become more about protecting their own interests and power. "How do they connect to Rodriguez and Morrison dying?" I asked. Sam wouldn't look me in the eye. "They have ways of dealing with people who betray them, ways that don't leave evidence." I pressed him for more, but he got up to leave. Before walking out, he leaned close and whispered, "Look into signal jamming technology. And Lauren, watch yourself. They're everywhere." That night, my apartment was broken into while I was at work. Nothing was taken, but everything was searched, and my laptop was missing. The copy of the USB drive I'd hidden in a hollowed-out book was gone too. They knew what I had. I didn't go home after that. I checked into a motel using cash and a fake name, then spent the night researching signal jamming and cardiac events. What I found blew my mind. There were research papers about directed energy weapons that could induce cardiac arrhythmias from a distance. Most were theoretical or military grade, but there were also simplified versions that could be built using modified radio equipment, the kind of equipment that police departments have access to. The next day, I used a burner phone to call an old college friend who now worked for the FBI. I didn't tell her everything, just enough to get her interested. We agreed to meet the following day so I could hand over all my evidence. That's when everything went to hell. I was at the motel, organizing my notes and the remaining copy of the files, when my burner phone received a text from an unknown number. It contained just one image, a red triangle. Seconds later, the TV turned on by itself, blasting static at full volume. Hidden in that static, I heard it again. Red signal active. My chest immediately felt tight, like someone was sitting on it. My left arm started tingling and I had trouble breathing. Classic heart attack symptoms. I was experiencing exactly what had killed Rodriguez and Morrison. I forced myself to move, stumbling out of the room and away from the TV. The farther I got, the more the symptoms subsided. They were using the TV somehow. The signal was coming through it. I got in my car and drove, no destination in mind, just trying to put distance between me and whatever had happened. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. When I finally stopped at a gas station to catch my breath, I tried to use my credit card to buy water. Declined. I tried another card, same result. When I checked my bank app, my accounts showed zero balance. My entire digital identity was being erased. I used the last of my cash to buy a prepaid phone and called my FBI contact. She answered on the first ring. "Lauren, where are you? There's a warrant out for your arrest." "What? On what charges?" "Evidence tampering, theft of police property, and they're trying to connect you to the deaths of Rodriguez and Morrison. Your fingerprints were found at both scenes." Of course they were. I was a detective investigating their deaths, but the Brotherhood was framing me, using the system against me. "I need protection," I told her. "This goes deeper than you know." She directed me to a federal building where I could surrender safely. When I arrived, there were 6 FBI agents waiting. They took my evidence and debriefed me for hours. I told them everything: the Brotherhood, the red triangle, the signal that caused heart attacks, all of it. To their credit, they took me seriously. My friend had already been looking into unusual patterns of deaths among law enforcement in several states. My information was the missing piece they needed. Within hours, a federal task force was assembled. They moved me to a secure location while they prepared to move against the Brotherhood. Warrants were obtained for 15 officers across 3 departments. The raid happened at dawn the next day. I watched via secure video feed as federal agents simultaneously entered police stations, homes, and a warehouse that served as the Brotherhood's meeting place. At the warehouse, they found what they were looking for: modified radio equipment connected to a central server. The tech was more sophisticated than anyone expected. They'd developed a system that could transmit a specific frequency through any connected device, car radios, TVs, even cell phones, that would induce cardiac arrhythmia in anyone within range. But the Brotherhood had a fail-safe. As federal agents were securing the equipment, 12 Brotherhood members who'd been arrested activated something on their watches. The warehouse equipment suddenly powered up, broadcasting at full strength. 7 federal agents collapsed immediately. Thankfully, the FBI tech team had brought signal jammers. They managed to block the transmission before anyone died, but those 7 agents all required medical attention for cardiac events. The investigation revealed the Brotherhood had infiltrated law enforcement agencies across 3 states. They'd been using their digital execution technology for years to eliminate threats and maintain their power. The red triangle was their calling card, a warning to anyone who crossed them. It's been 3 years since then. The trial is still ongoing, with new evidence emerging all the time. I testified under protection, but I knew I couldn't go back to my old life. The Brotherhood had members we never identified. I've been in witness protection, moved twice, changed my name. Sometimes I still hear static on my radio and my heart races. I check for red triangles everywhere I go. The doctors say I have PTSD, and they're probably right. Last week, I received a plain envelope in my mailbox at my new address. Inside was a blank sheet of paper with a small red triangle drawn in the corner. I packed my bags that night and left. I don't know if it was really them or just someone's sick idea of a joke, but I can't take that chance. I don't know if I'll ever stop running. All I know is that the Brotherhood is still out there, and as long as they are, no one who knows about them is truly safe.